For trainers, collectives, and individuals that were looking for a program to follow that was chud-free, or perhaps one that came directly from us, there is Liberation Martial Arts Online. Thanks to Jibril Walker, Brad Walker, and Justin Hamilton for signing up. If you want to sign up for Liberation Martial Arts Online or want to increase your financial support for the Southpaw Project, you can find special tiers on our Patreon. If you'd like to listen to all of our shows without any breaks or interruptions, you can also find uncut versions of our shows along with Fighters Brew and SDS9 on Patreon. This is Sam.
And this is Southpaw.
This episode was sponsored by Chad Loader, SH, M. Shelton, Berkshire People's Gym, and New Guy. This episode contains sensitive content, including discussions of sexual imperialism and children. Listener discretion is advised. Today is a very special episode of Southpaw because we're going to be talking about an experience you don't normally hear a lot about, which is the Black and Indigenous experience in martial arts, and in particular, Muay Thai, and training Muay Thai in Thailand. To talk about this topic, we have two guests, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
All right. Well, my name's Ron. I'm 24 years old, but I've been training martial arts, specifically Muay Thai, for about 14 years now. Now this is 2023. But I also train other martial arts. When I was in high school, I wrestled 4 years throughout high school. And I'm also a very recent blue belt in jiu-jitsu, even though I really barely train jiu-jitsu compared to striking. And I've been involved in combat sports pretty much the majority of my youth. And then I decided to take a break when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, which was right after I came back from Thailand, actually. And I had the impression that I was going to fight again within a year's time. When the pandemic got serious, I decided to stop fighting. I'm on hiatus. I haven't fought in a few years, but so I'd consider myself on a hiatus, but I haven't completely crossed out the possibility of competing again. I'm currently a history student. I'm a history major and a non-traditional student since I went to college when I was 18, dropped out, went to community college. Now I'm back in school because martial arts took up so much of my time and I thought I was going to be a pro fighter. And when that didn't work out, I realized I need a degree and something to fall back on. So now I'm in school, still training, and I'm coaching now as well. Not necessarily martial arts, but I'm a personal trainer now. I do want to get back into coaching martial arts, courtesy of the Liberation Martial Arts curriculum. Got to plug that for Sam. But yeah, that's my experience, my background. I'm also Black and from what's considered the DC metro area. But if you're from the area, you can call it the DMV, which basically consists of Washington, D.C., Southern Maryland, Northern Virginia. So a lot of my experience as a Black person growing up in what some consider like the belly of the beast or a richer county in America, training martial arts in that area, really, I would say I have a unique perspective because I don't really get to talk to a whole lot of people who view martial arts in the way that I do. So I'm very excited to have this chat today.
Has your family been in that area for a long time?
The thing is funny with especially like Black families who like grew up more in the Northeast, we're all kind of spread out everywhere. And for the Black listeners like listening to this, we're spread out everywhere, but it's funny how it all happens to be like we're spread out in the same places, if that makes sense. Like, I could be talking to a Black person in the street. Like I live in Richmond, Virginia right now. And, I can have conversations with other Black people in the street. And it's funny, we all happen to have like family from like certain areas that like are predominantly Black in nature. And just a lot of transience between like just our family roots. So a lot of even Black Northerners have roots in the South. So it's weird. It's funny. It's funny whenever people ask that because it's like, I mean, my family roots are kind of everywhere, but I'm not unique in that aspect, I will say.
Well, it's probably not weird, right? It's probably historical.
Absolutely. I have what is considered the uniquely black, quote unquote, American experience. But I kind of have I got my own critiques of that as far as like, we do have the unique black American experience, but I also don't want to conflate my experience as being something that's like it's part of America, but not in a good sense. And I feel like too many people kind of treat that as like, is like almost kind of how like certain people treat poverty as something like honorable or something you have to go through to purify yourself. It's kind of how people talk about like being black in America, like almost like it's almost like glorifying an abusive relationship where it's like, I actually prefer that my ancestors didn't have to go through what they went through in order for us to get to this point in time. Because as far as I can tell, not a whole lot changed, and a lot of people suffered and died for great causes that have been denigrated. And I don't feel the need to try to, romanticize America, because I know what America has done to people who look like me, both internationally and domestically. You got a whole society, like you got a whole society that's built off of basically free extracted wealth that they didn't have to pay people for hundreds of years. And that money doesn't just go away, whether people want to admit that or not. So that's my big critique, where it's like, yeah, I got the black American experience, but I'm not really proud of the American part. If that's controversial, then like whatever.
It's like the euphemism of a nation of immigrants.
Yep.
And it's like glorifying something that shouldn't be glorified, to your point. There's a lot of diversity in this country, meaning there's all kinds of people here, but it's like diversity paved with blood. Often this country flexes that, but it's like nothing to flex about. At least how it got there.
Yeah, like it's nothing to be proud of. But if you really like know even if you're looking at it from like, I'm like the most basic of historical perspectives, it's hard to make an argument that's something to be proud of, even from like a liberal perspective. You know, even some of the like works that I've seen recently, which you have actually specifically put me onto, as far as like looking globally at what the U.S. has done globally, which we'll get into more obviously with the title of this episode, seeing as both Michael and I have been to Thailand. But like, it's just like, even like liberal historians who all they want to do is just like find the truth and share the facts, they have to basically say like, yeah, a lot of what's bad is going on in the world that's going on in the world was orchestrated by the US, not necessarily because they're like staunch communists or anti-imperialists. That's just the facts.
Especially the modern world, right? And we could get into history and coloniality as this conversation progresses. But we have Mike also, who's not even in the US. He's in Canada.
Yeah, so my name's Mike. I'm from northern Saskatchewan. Currently reside in sort of in the prairies for, well, pretty much my whole life. I'm First Nations. I'm Cree. Or we call it Nehewak. And so raised in rural Saskatchewan, grew up in a small town, very small town. I graduated with like I think 11 people in my high school, and yeah, it was very like I don't want to like romanticize the rural upbringing too much, because it was like hella racist in a lot of ways, and but that there's just something, I suppose, like that sort of imprints on your ways of thinking as you get older, right? You always sort of take the places that you were raised within, and it sort of shapes how you look at the world. And certainly, growing up Cree in the prairies in northern Saskatchewan, in our particular climate, with our particular history and geography, yeah, it's been it's an interesting journey. I know part of this introduction is to sort of position ourselves, or our standpoint, so to speak. And being a First Nations man, I'm 37 years old, and I came to martial arts like quite later, I suppose, relative to Ron. I started in my early 20s, and I kind of came to it more so because of I worked a lot in the bar industry at that time. And it was more just an interest of like self-defense, I suppose. That's what really kind of brought it to me in the first place. And so I've been training for about over 15 years. And it's brought me, some really incredible experiences. I was doing a little bit of coaching about 5-6 years ago. We could talk about that a little bit later on about, just some interesting insights about coaching in this place, and the politics of martial arts in Saskatchewan is interesting and a bit, quite different, I suppose, than what I understand the States to be. But yeah, I kind of, First Nations man, like the territory we kind of grew up in and around we call it Treaty 6 up in here, but it's sort of like, mid-northern Saskatchewan, sort of like a lot of prairie land kind of mixed in with northern boreal forest. And so, yeah, like the land and that sort of aspect certainly features prominently in sort of like how Cree people think of themselves and how they relate to one another. It's, we always say, we come from the land, and it's a powerful sort of aspect of who we are. So we tend to sort of like, talk about our ourselves and our histories and our communities in terms of, what land we come from. And, my family certainly were Plains Cree, but my First Nation, my reserve, in particular, is situated along the South Saskatchewan River. And traditionally our families camped and basically resided in and around that sort of South Saskatchewan River, which traditionally was a very popular travel route. And it's where sort of a lot of different sort of communities, nations sort of intersected. So, and the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I know I have a lot of more than just Nehiyawak ancestry within me. I know I got some Dakota and Nakaway or Anishinaabe family in there as well. And I just sort of attribute that to the fact that we lived along a popular travel route.
I mean, speaking of land, we're talking about US and Canada, but that border is like a fictitious line. It's just like one day, hey, you just can't go back and forth, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we got a border here. It's like, hey, did you ask us? Nobody asked us about this.
Yeah, totally. And, kind of being raised with that attitude, being like, Canada and the US are sort of these, fictions, I suppose, that, are my grandparents and, and certainly like the Indigenous community and the people that sort of I was raised around, kind of just, tongue in cheek sort of attitude towards, Canadian and US sovereignty, right? Because their borders were, like you said it already, Sam, that like, their borders were imposed on us. And, yeah, it's interesting because, our families and our kinship relations extend well beyond just, Canada and the US, our families, and our kinship systems can, extend well into the States. And that's often the case too. I have several friends and colleagues that, families kind of are just, spread all across, northern United States and southern Saskatchewan, and as far east as BC and as far west as Ontario. And, yeah, it's a vast, diverse kinship network, and it's kind of arbitrary because a lot of people get caught up in like, oh, is it American or Canadian? And we just sort of like, well, no, we're Dakota, or we're Lakota, or we're Anishinaabe, or we're Nehiyawak, or it's just sort of, yeah, it's funny.
What were the martial arts that you initially took?
I guess part of the allure to martial arts, I guess, kind of partially stemmed a little bit from the fact that my dad was a boxer when he was in his early 20s, and I guess we kind of grew up. I should also preface, like, I was raised by my grandparents, but like knowing my dad growing up, like he kind of always talked about this era of time when boxing was a big part of his life and how, important it was and how great it was. And so I kind of like that attitude kind of like seeped in my brain a little bit. And so when I kind of jumped to martial arts, it was sort of like there was this subtle impulse, I suppose, being informed by this desire to, to appease my dad, I guess. But yeah, working in the bar, certainly there was a more practical need for knowledge to just kind of like keep me safe. And my assumption was, at the time, and I think that comes with, misconceptions around martial arts. You go in, you take a couple classes, you learn a few moves, and then, you know how to handle yourself in all these different situations, right? And that's just, that sort of outlook immediately sort of gave way after I started training. But yeah, my first foray into martial arts was with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. Although I started with BJJ, and I guess I did that for about 4 or 5 years, but I kept getting injured. I was just sort of getting like ragdolled in the gym a lot by these like really like super strong like white farmer guys that were like didn't know didn't know any restraint. And it was, so it was just like, I didn't feel like a safe place for me anymore. So I just kind of stuck with just the Muay Thai and really took that up and eventually started, competing and traveling overseas to train more. So.
Was the training environment then diverse?
No, it wasn't. When I first started training, like it was the gym I went to and still go to is kind of a bit of an institution in Western Canada. They're one of the very like small handful of gyms in Western Canada that have been operating since I think late 60s, early 70s. And in that case, it's a very much like a karate centric gym, right? Like when I first went in there, it was like, karate's their focus, right? But, and I suppose like when I first started there, it was like, it was a very different facility than what they're currently in right now. Like we moved to a new space, which is just like this ginormous old tennis facility that was retrofitted into a martial arts gym, which is great right now. It's got like all the space in the world, which is fantastic. But I kind of miss the old days where we were kind of stuck in this little place in downtown Saskatoon here. And it was like, it was more like, I don't want to romanticize it, but I mean, it felt more communal. It felt a little bit more sort of like, hands-on, I suppose. But it was like, it was, there was no, I think I was one of only two brown people in that whole gym. That whole time I've ever been there, I'm probably one of a handful of people. And in fact, I'm the only, non-white person who's ever fought on the fight team, outside of, one dude who was, Chilean, but he ended up getting booted off the fight team because of, basically some unsavory shit that he did with regards to a fellow teammate at one point. And so it's been a pretty solitary experience, being Indigenous, training martial arts and doing it at this particular gym, which isn't very diverse.
Is it mostly men?
Yes, absolutely. It's mostly men. It's getting better. In the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years, you're definitely seeing a lot more women coming into the gym and training, and particularly with the younger groups. Like I've noticed now, especially with the younger ones, like those who started training early on stuck with it, and so you're starting to see more parity in terms of gender within the gym. But certainly, it's still very like cis heteronormative spaces, right? Like I don't really see a whole lot of sort of I've never seen trans fighters, or I've never seen really spaces that, in my experience, were really accommodating towards the LGBTQ2S community here in Saskatoon. So yeah, it's been a little bit challenging, I suppose, being in that space, because it hasn't really been accommodating to sort of non-white, sort of heteronormative sort of bodies and types. Yeah.
Did you see martial arts training from the beginning as political, or did you see it initially as an apolitical endeavor?
Oh yeah, hindsight's 2020, right? Looking back at it right now with the perspective and the knowledge that I have now, certainly it's easy to characterize it as, in the way that I have. But when I was first started within this space, it was purely sort of practical, right? I wanted to train, I wanted to learn these things so I could, keep myself safe within that industry. Because I worked, the bars I worked within were like, man, they were gnarly. They were really dangerous. There was frequent violence. I dealt guns, stabbings. I was stabbed a couple times myself working there. So it was really, the practical need to feel safe in those spaces was really driving my desire to be to study martial arts. And, once I started doing it, I kind of, it was a sort of a love affair right from day one. Although, because I didn't have, the political understandings that I do now, I didn't really sort of, view the spaces I was in at that time as, super problematic, I guess. But it was obvious to me that, being the only brown guy in the room, it was like, it was quite obvious to me that it was just, but that wasn't unfamiliar to me. Like that growing up in small town Saskatchewan, being the only brown kid in my school, it wasn't sort of like unfamiliar to me. And so I kind of like went into it like I did with most things up to that point in time, just sort of head down, go in, do the work, don't sort of raise noise, don't sort of be loud or boisterous, because, like the nail that sticks out gets the hammer, right? And that's sort of a survival tactic you learn being Indigenous in Saskatchewan is, you learn to sort of, I don't know, blend in, I suppose.
Speaking to that then, how would you describe the culture of the gym or just the culture of martial arts that you experienced?
It was like a kill or be killed attitude. And certainly that was the ethos. And I still think today, even like that's certainly an attitude that's, undergirds the attitudes and the philosophy of training martial arts today. But, back then that was certainly like the attitude. It was like, steel sharpens steel. We call our fight training sessions the Shark Tank. It's like, it was very like, you gotta like step up and like hold your own. If you get injured, it was, you gotta kind of just fight through it. It was like a very like, you gotta tough up sort of attitude, and it wasn't super nurturing in a lot of ways. And I was, I was kind of suffering a lot from like little just injuries here and there. Luckily, like, I kind of grew up quite athletic, I suppose. I trained a lot in racket sports actually for most of my youth. I competed at the provincial and national levels when I was in high school. And so like high sort of level athletic sort of development wasn't sort of unfamiliar to me. And certainly getting into that space, it was satiating a desire that I had growing up about like competition and just the work of athletics was something that I really found myself being attracted to. And not only that, but being in that space at that time, it was quite obvious to me that like it fed into that sort of that traditional masculine sort of idea that you got the only way to be as a man is to be a person who can like it kind of reminds me, as I'm saying this out loud, a little bit of that like sort of toxic man sort of sentiment you hear like the Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro fans kind of talking about it, but you got to kind of always be lethal all the time kind of thing, because that's what actually promotes safety, is always being lethal. And it was kind of like that kind of really fucked up attitude that definitely was, I'd say, part of like, certainly at that time, part of like MMA culture. And keeping in mind too, there's another important thing I should probably mention is that like MMA is huge like around this area, especially at that time. There wasn't there wasn't a bar or venue that wasn't showing UFC fights, and it was always such a big event people would kind of gather around, especially within like Native communities. Like it was such a popular sport, and with the rise of MMA, and I certainly think that also sort of influenced my decision to get into it, because I was watching UFC from a very early age, and so kind of like getting into that space. The culture at that time was certainly, I would say, it's evolved, but in some ways it's pretty much still exactly the same. It's still that very much like suppress your other parts. You're here just to sort of torture your body to like get better kind of attitude.
What do you think made MMA so popular in that area?
It was new, it was like this idea of stripping traditional martial arts kind of down, taking away the rules. There was sort of this desire to see people, well, the desire for violence, is definitely part of it, but also to see like, this skill, and like, there's a big sort of aspect of warrior culture too within a lot of Indigenous communities that I think feeds this sort of conscious or unconscious desire to see yourself as a fighter, quote unquote. And certainly I think that's what helped popularize it within Indigenous communities, is that we're already sort of like have an affinity for pugilism, I suppose. Even in this area, there was a lot of Métis Indigenous boxers in the 70s, and yeah, I think that just appreciation for boxing and martial arts was already sort of part of the the firmament within Saskatchewan. But yeah, with in the early 2000s, though, the rise of MMA and the UFC, it was like, and also too, like, people here love to drink, and it was an excuse to get wasted with other people together.
What attracted you to Muay Thai?
Well, it was two things. One was the movie Ong Bak. When I was super young, I was just like, what the hell is this? And like, how do I get into it? And like, it just blew my mind. I couldn't, like, I mean, even just trying to like think and put myself into that mind space of when I first watched that movie. It was just like, it just kind of like peeled back my brain and thought about like, oh, this is all these other different ways of like expressing your body. And my experience with martial arts up to that point, was like most people in northern Saskatchewan, which is pretty much non-existent. We had this like a guy who did Taekwondo classes once a week, every weekend, in a town that was about 35 kilometers ish away. But it was usually, it was expensive. I grew up quite poor, and so it was just sort of outside of our means at that point in time. And so yeah, like the experience of martial arts was pretty much non-existent at that point. But so yeah, Ong Bak was a big part of it. And then the second part of it was watching Anderson Silva. And when I was watching like early videos of Anderson Silva, I remember that one fight he fought Chris
Levin.
Yeah, where he does the upward elbow.
Oh, that was Tony Frickland.
Yeah, Tony Frickland. Totally. Yeah. Thanks for that.
He's how I got into Muay Thai too. He's the sole reason I did Muay Thai instead of wrestling in middle school, straight up.
And he had a way of carrying himself that was like more attractive to me, I guess, as a martial artist, as opposed to, people that I were seeing previous to that, And so, yeah, like it was like partly culture, partly watching what I was seeing on UFC is kind of like, attending these fights, because at that point in time, they would come, they weren't like even every month, they were once every few months. So it was kind of a big event when they'd come together. And obviously when you're seeing like this guy just absolutely dominate the sport, it was like, well, clearly there's something there, not only have this aesthetic quality that I was really attracted to in terms of like how the body moves, and but you're also seeing this guy just completely wreck like every person he's being put in front of. So it kind of told me two things. One, it looks cool, and it works. And so that told me kind of what I needed to know in terms of what its possible import could be for working in a bar, right? Because I was thinking to myself, like, I'm not going to sit in a bladed stance and try to tee off with some guy in the bar. It's just, it didn't seem like it was going to be something of much value to me. And of course, that was my understanding of martial arts at the time. Now I've kind of I see things a little bit differently now. But yeah, it was media, and it was movies. It was watching Anderson Silva just wreck dudes, and it was that's kind of what brought me into Muay Thai.
And what about you, Ron?
So I was it was funny, I actually chatted about this recently in the Discord, so this will probably be a familiar conversation. Y'all just get to hear it from my voice. But so I was originally a basketball player growing up. Like, I was really into basketball, was hooping every day. But truth be told, I was getting to a point where I wasn't really liking the sport in middle school for personal reasons, mainly because I started coming up in the AAU circuit because, I thought I was gonna, want to play in high school, maybe try to get like an opportunity to get a scholarship in college, because, every black kid who plays basketball is definitely scholarship, or they're definitely gonna go D1 or D2. It's inevitable. But I wasn't really that good, and I was short, and I didn't have the physicality for a lot of them boys playing at the highest level of AAU. And honestly, I was a bench warmer most of the time, just because I just was not that good compared to everybody else on my team. It really wasn't fun. I wasn't enjoying it at all, and I just was like, I was just done with it. And around that time, so like I would say maybe a year and a half. It seemed a lot longer when I was younger, but honestly, it's probably about no more than a year and a half before I decided to play basketball. I discovered MMA first, specifically because we had a PlayStation 3 and I was playing UFC Undisputed 2009 actually. which in my opinion is still the best MMA video game to this day. The EA Sports ones absolutely suck. Just this one as an aside. But anyways, I was really into it. Just it was a fun game to play for me as a kid. I'm like 10, 11 years old playing this game. But I also was like, yeah, it's really cool. I want to be able to do that. And so I was thinking about potentially just like, I'm quitting basketball. Maybe I should wrestle in middle school. But everybody's like, oh, all those kids, wrestle when they were like 4, they'll kill you. They're like all that, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, fine, what am I supposed to do? And then, I started like binge watching like when we finally got cable, my family got Fry's and Fios. There was some OG MMA and even kickboxing fans remember HDNet because that's where like all the K1 replays were at and like all like the kickboxing fights were at. And then at the time, Spike TV was still around before it became Paramount. And then I was watching all the UFC Unleashed. I was watching Best of Pride. I was watching all of it, dude. I was like in the Sakuraba and Anderson Silva specifically is what got me into Muay Thai because my main thing with Anderson Silva is just like it just looked pretty. Like I'm like that's good fighting, you know. And I appreciated a lot of the other guys doing the sport, I was still watching like when I first started watching UFC, despite being 24, I remember UFC pre ESPN. A lot of people my age who are UFC fans don't even know that fighters used to have sponsors on their shorts, which is how much the narrative has changed even in the last handful of years, just for perspective. Which is why it's like I love the fight studies that Southpaw does because, you know, you specifically, Sam, and even Coach Jason, shout out to Coach Jason as well. Like y'all are OGs, so y'all know things that a lot of people today just don't know. And so as far as like my experience with Muay Thai, a lot of it really MMA was the real thing that got me into Muay Thai, ironically. And things kind of circle back around. Now, I'm no longer fighting Muay Thai, so it's not the thing that I'm consuming the most. But I still do. That's my main sport to this day. Like I'm a Muay Thai fighter, even if I never fight again. I'm a Muay Thai fighter for life. I'm a Muay Thai guy for life. But MMA, I will never disrespect MMA as a sport. I'll disrespect the culture all day and the people involved. That's a no brainer. but seriously though, as a sport, I will never like shit on MMA as a sport because I feel like, and to keep this conversation relevant to martial arts, I feel like one thing that I dislike about MMA and I also dislike about Muay Thai doesn't get a pass on this too, is this need to constantly shit on other martial arts. You know, even jujitsu doesn't just be shat on, but the problem is they never shit on it for like the right reasons. It's always like it's always like alluding to like something like some like really like masculine trope, like oh they're grappling on the ground, they're not real shit like dumb shit like that. Like it's childish to say the least. But like if we're gonna critique a martial art, the way I see it, let's critique real things and not impose these like false masculine dichotomies onto combat sports that can express themselves differently in different people, which is why I got into it in the first place. I like the art aspect, and I feel like a lot of that art is being taken away because of forces outside of our direct control, whether it be marketing, the UFC's branding of just fighting, period, not even just MMA, just what good fighting is. They don't even reward their best fighters the best. How funny is that? And then, just as far as like the narrative surrounding like quote unquote effective martial arts. Y'all have probably both heard this a million times. What's the most effective martial art for self defense from a bunch of guys? Let's be real, fucking white guys who live in the suburbs, live relatively safe lives, have a lot of disposable income to train, spend fucking $200, $300 a month training only jujitsu, and then they think they think they have the secret to self defense because they definitely have experience being in a situation where they need to defend themselves rather than being the person that people probably need some defense against. Usually it's the other way around with these people, but they don't do enough for self-reflection to analyze that. And even with Muay Thai, one problem I ran into even before I became political. Originally, Muay Thai was purely an athletic pursuit for me, apolitical, but a truly athletic pursuit. I just wanted to get better. I wanted to be a pro fighter. I wanted to be on K1. I wanted to fight in like Kurikan Hall, be like Boykow and all. I was obsessively watching Lumpini fights, the Rajadhanarm fights, stadium fights, Omnoy fights. And I'm like in high school watching this. Nobody knows what the hell Muay Thai is when I'm in high school. Like at best, I can have a conversation with people about wrestling, but it's so I just love that Muay Thai has this thing where they like are proud of like they want to encapsulate the beauty of Muay Thai, but they do it in a way that like glorifies the worst parts of it, if that makes sense. Like there's so much beauty within Muay Thai, yet there's beauty. They only find beauty in the things that actually don't. I personally don't like about it, but a lot of people don't like it about it. They might not say it out loud, but you know, I don't necessarily find it proper that like a lot of judging in the stadiums in Thailand has a lot to do with catering to the gamblers. That has nothing to do with how I feel about Thailand or Thai culture. That's just an economic thing. I'm looking at it as a fighter.
Or the Western glorification, like you mentioned, of poverty.
Exactly.
Whether it's in the US of like the hungry basketball player or whatever coming up.
Oh my God.
And it's the same trope
Yes.
in Thailand. Oh, the beauty of their poverty.
Yes. That is exactly it. Like and it's funny because you asked Michael about how diverse was the gym setting, and for me, I gotta say my gym setting was, at least my initial gym setting was diverse. I will say that. Now, diverse as far as like race, but if we're talking like was it mostly men of a certain income bracket? No, it was not diverse at all. And I'm blessed to have parents who saw how passionate I was to train martial arts and allow me to pursue these endeavors, travel as much as I did, and all of that, because I know they didn't have it like that. And all they really wanted me to do, despite that, was to do something that I loved and enjoyed. So I will forever thank them for that, no matter what, because this shit is expensive, first and foremost, which is another reason why I hate the effective martial art conversation, because it never takes into account finances, income, person's work schedule, none of that. It just assumes we all are equal. We all have $300 to $500 worth of disposable income
every month.
Exactly. And just train 5 to 6 days a week.
Didn't you say your dad also did some boxing?
Yes, he did. Actually, so I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the DC DMV area. So my dad grew up in Prince George's County. And if you're a boxing fan, that's where Sugar Ray Leonard is from. And he was training at the gym that he came up in, that Sugar Ray Leonard came up in, and his son actually trained at that same gym. And when my dad found out I wanted to do Muay Thai, he was really excited. And it's funny, I might actually share this episode with him just so he can hear this, but like, it's funny, he really wanted me to get into boxing to help my Muay Thai more. And when I was younger, of course, I'm younger, I don't give a fuck what my dad says. He doesn't know about this. I'm the Muay Thai guy, I'm the shit, right? But I look back at it and I kind of wish I had taken some of his advice. And to be fair, I wish that boxing was more accessible today as it was back in his day, because I remember there was an incident, and he probably remembers this better than I do, so that's why I'm probably going to share this episode with him. But there was an incident where I was preparing for a big junior tournament, a 125-pound junior tournament, and like this was like 2013, 2014, and I was like, at a point in time, may not seem like it, but there was a point in time where I was one of the best junior fighters in my weight class in the country. Those days are gone. I'm not going to be that guy hyping up my junior record, but I'm just giving context for this story. But I wanted to look at a local boxing gym to get my hands right, because I really wanted to learn some boxing. And this is gonna delve into the conversation, and keep in mind, I'm a junior fighter. This is very important. I was a junior fighter. I don't even think I was 14. I'm an amateur fighter, clearly a Muay Thai fighter, just looking to cross train in some boxing to help my hands. And basically, to make a long story short, I get to this gym that's only like 10 minutes away from where I was living at that time. And the gym was right across the street from where my dad used to work at, which is how he knew about it. So he just figured it'd be convenient for him. And it probably would have been easier if I started boxing more, because it was near where he worked at. But the coach who was at this gym basically said, because I'm not going to stick with boxing only, then I'm going to take the skills that he teaches me and use them for my own. And I'm not making this shit up, and use them in Muay Thai and not give him any credit for it. And he didn't allow me to train for this. So what that meant was he didn't allow a kid, an amateur fighter, to train because he didn't think that he would get any props for it, even though I'm not even getting paid in these fights, you know? So that was my first experience with boxing, but this is not unique to boxing as well. And we'll probably talk more about incidents like this just in the fight world in general. But I think back on that incident a lot because, man, I wonder how many people, aspiring martial artists, aspiring fighters, have encountered a situation like that where all they're trying to fucking do is get better, improve their craft. And because of the ego of a coach, not because of because of the pure ego of a coach, they kind of got pushed away from a sport because of that shit. Because I know I'm not the only one, and this probably happens a lot more than a lot of people want to talk about. So, but I love boxing despite that. And I've really grown to love boxing just as much as Muay Thai, which is why I try my best to. I like connecting those two better than MMA because I feel like MMA is heading down a path that I do not want Muay Thai latching itself onto, because I can see the shitstorm brewing from the gambling situation with James Krause to just, this power slap bullshit. Like this, that like there's so many things happening in MMA right now that I want more. I want the greater Muay Thai community to look at MMA and not be like, yo, we should do that shit to get more money. Like, nah, look at what MMA got wrong and don't do that shit. That's all I ask them to do. But I'm living on an island here, man. I'm struggling out here, so you know how it is.
The reason why I asked you about boxing and making the connection with both of your histories is because for a lot of martial artists of color, that's not unusual. They often say they had a parent or somebody in their family who was boxing, especially for Black and brown communities, especially of a certain era, because you could track poverty over the years with boxing. That is a part of boxing history. And then I will also want to make a point about Anderson Silva. For a lot of martial artists of color, especially of a certain age, people don't understand how important Anderson Silva was. He isn't just a fighter. He's become something more than that. I wanted to now ask you both about Thailand because you've both fought and trained in Thailand. And I think for both of you, how you saw your experiences at the time is different from how you see it now. As Mike said, today's eyes are different from the eyes he had back then.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess like a bit of context. So I first went to Thailand to train back in 2008. And man, that seems like so long ago. And I suppose a lot's happened since then. Obviously, this was before like smartphones even like were really a big thing. Basically everyone had, your at that point in time, certainly in Thailand, it was still, just handheld Nokias for the most part. And we used MSN Messenger still, to talk with one another. I'm giving away my age here, but that first trip, 2008 was really important for me for a lot of reasons. One being it was my first, like growing up poor Indigenous in Saskatchewan. It's like, not a lot of opportunities to travel. But my mom from a very early age always like taught me, my siblings and I, like the importance of travel and how important that is for a person's development. And so, she like, I'll never forget, like, when we were 15, like she pretty much put herself in like really intense debt, basically just to get us to a trip to Hawaii. And Hawaii is like really important to her for all sorts of reasons I won't get into, but it sort of like shaped this attitude towards travel that I carry with me that was really nurtured by my mother. And so traveling overseas alone for the very first time was like a pretty big deal for me at that point in time. And I wasn't motivated to go out there to fight. I should be clear on that. I wanted to just sort of like, I just graduated from university. I got my bachelor's degree. And, I was kind of doing that thing most kids do when they, get the degree. They go and find themselves after, going through university and going through that drudgery. But my goal was actually to live out there for quite a while. I wanted to live out there for at least a few months, just kind of see how things go. And if I fought, that'd be great. But that certainly kind of wasn't that my motivation. If I'm being completely honest, I think I was actually too fucking terrified to fight at that point in time, because it was still very much like a practical thing, a fitness thing. I was really sort of realizing too, like at that point in time, after a few years of training, I was starting to see Muay Thai more as a maybe I didn't explicitly have the language for it at the time, but certainly I was beginning to see Muay Thai as a spiritual sort of venture, because I grew up in a quite an abusive household, and trauma figured predominantly in my upbringing, in my family's upbringing, and certainly with my siblings. And so I was starting to see like this, I don't know, I don't want to call it redemption, but I saw peace, I guess, a sense of serenity that Muay Thai was giving me that I didn't quite experience anywhere else. And so I really wanted to devote my time and effort into kind of pursuing that a bit more. And so although the desire wasn't competition at that time, that first trip really showed me a lot, because, it was my first trip overseas, like peeled away a lot of my preconceptions about what Thai people were like, what Thai culture was like. And then certainly the training was like, was really intense. Like I'd never experienced like a proper Thai training camp before. And that just completely wrecked me. Like it was so rewarding, but like at the same time, it was like, it really showed me the difference between, Thai training methods versus the ones that I was kind of experiencing back home, right? Because I was training, 2-3 hour sessions every day, 6 days a week for a long period of time. And so, my athletic development was just improving so much. I lost a lot of weight. I was, starting to see myself in a very different light. And yeah, so that first trip, I would have stayed longer, but what ended up happening is I rented this is, lessons learned, but I rented a moped. And for anyone who's traveled out to Southeast Asia, you shouldn't give your passport out to anyone, which is what I did at this moped rental place. And I ended up actually running the moped over a cliff, trying to go to this little tea house up on a hill in Koh Phangan. And so suffice to say, I dragged this moped back to the guy, and I ended up getting charged like pretty much all the money that I had saved up to hold me over for that time. And so I ended up spending like pretty much most of my trip, that first trip, like just really pretty much almost broke. I would have went home a lot sooner, but my coach, I'll never forget it. Like I was staying at this camp called Chinarach Muay Thai. It's in Koh Phangan, and it's the coach basically he cleaned out a room, and he said like, you can live with me and my family. And like I shared breakfast, dinner, lunch, weekends. I helped out with they had fights every Friday or Saturday night. And so it was a really good experience, because it kind of like, I got to actually live with this Thai family, and this and the coach was a former Lumpini champion. And so it was just like, it was a series of unfortunate circumstances actually led me to having a more enriched Muay Thai experience, because Westerners come into that space, and they come in often with decent amount of money, with expectations of the creature comforts that we have at home. And I didn't have any of that. I had a mosquito net and a hole in the ground to do my number ones and number twos. And that was fine. That was great. Actually, it was, I didn't really have any sort of, lofty expectations in terms of like what my accommodations needed to be. But I felt like in a way it gave me a much more grounded experience, being able to sort of get up with the coach, go to, stay in the same house as a coach. And certainly that also like, I started to feel more part of a community, and yeah, that was really good. But the next time I went was a couple of years later, and then that's when I actually fought. At that point in time, my coach here, he got his sort of, I'll call it Muay Thai cred, I suppose, from Grandmaster Toddy, who at that point in time was running a Muay Thai gym out of Las Vegas.
Gina Carano's coach.
Yeah, Gina Carano's coach, exactly. And so, yeah, at that time, my coach had sort of encouraged me to check out Grandmaster Toddy's gym at some point if I ever get the chance. And I went to So I went to Thailand again in 2011 with training with a group of guys from my gym. Actually, it was only supposed to be a couple of weeks, but I ended up staying for a month longer than everyone else. And I made the decision, during that trip to fight in Thailand. And my coach introduced me to Grandmaster Toddy at that time, and I stayed at his gym, and that's kind of where I stayed. And I did I did 3 trips to Thailand in 2011 to fight and to train with Master Toddy, and that was an illuminating experience. Just in terms of like going from the first experience I had in in the islands down in Thailand, southern Thailand, to then training in Bangkok, it was a much more different experience. And plus, I was also the gym I was at, Master Toddy's gym, just came actually. We were like 2 weeks there after the that Fight Girls reality show was playing, that was just recorded there, and so it was kind of interesting, because Gina Carano at that point in time was becoming was competing, I believe, and was a fairly well known name in Muay Thai, and so it was kind of cool. And there was kind of like, there was this allure. It's like, oh, I'm training with the same coach, like Coach Gina Carano, and and all these in a lot of European Muay Thai champs as well. And so it was interesting, to sort of like navigate that space. And then and you brought it up earlier, Sam, was like, the motivation to fight, was it to just sort of beat a Thai person as if like it's the final boss at the end of this video game, and it's like you can wear it as this badge of honor. If I'm being honest with you, I think that was this sort of like, there was this sort of built-in assumption, I suppose, when you go to Thailand, that if you get to fight a Thai, like you're fighting against someone who's the best at it, right? Like, because the assumption is like Thai people are at the best at Muay Thai, and ergo, the logic is if you beat them, like then that's sort of like elevates you, I suppose. But that's a really problematic assumption, because when enough people are saying that, it starts to breed this sort of like disposition, that Thai bodies in particular are just there for brutality or violence. And certainly that's an attitude that a lot of foreigners or Falun, folks who go to Thailand certainly treat the country, the people, the land, like they're disposable. And that's certainly been my experience every single time I've been there. It's very obvious, and it's very in your face just how Western chauvinism and like just tourists come to that place and treat it like a toilet, and it's hard for me to sort of see how that attitude could not have shaped my my desire to want to beat a Thai person, right? Like, because my very first fight in Thailand, it was actually against a British guy, and there was sort of like this like, I don't know what we call it, disappointment, but there was also like, if I'm being fully honest with you too, like I've only fought like white people, and so there's been like this sort of like being a native guy in the prairies, like there's like a little bit of, I'll call it like pride, I suppose, that comes with that, and there's like some built-in sort of issues with that, right? Because I mean, when you're training and fighting in the prairies, for instance, like these are fundamentally white male spaces. And I remember my last fight, me and my mom, like we smudged outside the building firsthand. We did a little ceremony just to kind of like go in with good things, wish my opponents, their coaches, my coaches, just express gratitude, blessings, that kind of thing. And as we were walking into the ring, I was like, I always have an eagle feather with me, and so I was, I held it above my head, and you could just almost like hear the pin drop in the whole room when I did that. It was just like, how could this Indigenous person dare to be Indigenous in this space, kind of thing. And so certainly, like that motivates a guy, to want to perform well and do well. And, and I suppose when I had that, when I was supposed to fight the British guy, it actually fell through, like literally like half hour before the fight was supposed to start. I'm sitting there at this mall in Bangkok, and it was like an outdoor ring, and there was television there. It was quite for my very first fight in Thailand, like that was it was a big platform, and I was quite like, I was ready for it. I trained, and I was quite, excited to get in there. But really disappointed that it ultimately fell through. The next day, I was just like, well, I might as well make the best of it. Like I thought I just wasn't going to fight at all on that trip, because I actually had to fly home in about a week. And, the time that it takes to organize it, plan it, and all that kind of stuff, I just, I didn't know much at that time. So I just assumed it wouldn't happen at all. So the next day I get up, train in the morning, just, like things are going on as normal. And, Master Toddy comes out and he says, I got to fight for you. Stop training right now. It's like, you're going to get in a vehicle right now, and you're going to drive 3 hours to northern Bangkok, and you're going to have a fight. And so I did. And it was like actually under this bridge, and the only people really in the crowd were Buddhist monks, a bunch of kids. And yeah, I ended up fighting an actual Thai guy. He had like 30 fights to his name or something like that, which my coach didn't tell me at that time. He just told me he was amateur, and just like, I had no idea about what like the logistics of fighting in Thailand was like at that point in time. I was just like, just put me in a ring and, let me go kind of thing. And so the first fight, like I won, and it was like, certainly there was the elation of winning, which, as anyone who's fought in the ring knows, there's, nothing quite like it. But like as the years have waned and I start to unpack, the attitudes that kind of brought me into that space, and certainly how I was representing that experience to other people. It's an unsavory aspect of it that I think, it's worth exploring now, because I hear that certainly with a lot of folks who choose to go fight in Thailand, right? Or choose to go train in Thailand. They kind of see beating Thai people as sort of like this badge of honor. And I think it's problematic for all sorts of reasons. One, obviously, if you understand the history of Thailand, and certainly the history of U.S. imperialism in Thailand, it's like, the West just treats a lot of Southeast Asia like this, and in Thailand it's no different. It was like my experience. It was just like, and certainly I had this attitude certainly with a lot of the people I either shared training spaces with, or certainly I felt this was especially true with fighters from America. I shared a camp at Master Toddy's with quite a few fighters, and some of them were from from North Carolina, and some were from Dakota or South Dakota, and it was quite obvious to me at that time, like Americans were a bit different in terms of how they approached it. Like they were quite, they're all in the same basket as most Western folks who travel out to Thailand, but it was especially pronounced, I noticed, because like a couple of the folks that I was training with, a couple of the Americans I was training at Master Toddy's, it was what really struck me right off the bat was just like the frothy sort of love for American military. Like that was like, I found that like it's a trope, I know, like going into that space, but it was like suddenly it was in front of me, and I saw some of these Americans kind of like vacillating as if like their presence there and their approach to dealing with Thai folks was dessert because they're American, and like they're peaking, right? Like they've earned that ability to be just complete dickbags to people, and to sort of stew in that justification was something that really was quite off-putting at that point in time. But I mean, like, I suppose it made me uncomfortable to a certain extent, because it was really hitting home that idea that Thai people were just there to be used. And I suppose it made me a little bit uncomfortable because, if I'm being honest with you, I think I carried a bit of that attitude as well. And so it's I think it's healthy for a lot of people who choose to go to train in Thailand to explore their motivations for doing so. And especially if your motivation is just to go there to beat a Thai person, I'd really, question that,
Was it similar to training in the prairies where most of the foreigners were cishet white men from the West?
Yeah, it's very similar. Like, the very first camp I went to, Chinrach, it was all white men from Europe. It was like, it was pretty, it was pretty non-diverse. And the same thing's been true pretty much for every Thai camp I've been to, outside of maybe perhaps the last one I was at back in 2018. I went to Sitsong Pino in Phuket, and there was quite a few. That was actually the most diverse I've ever seen it. There was like near gender parity, all sorts of different body types, sizes. It was quite nice to see, actually.
A note to our listeners: if you love the Southpaw Project, Please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, like early releases of Southpaw Deep Space Nine, our fictional narrative podcast, Fighters Brew, break-free versions of our shows without interruptions like you're hearing now, bonus articles, Fighters Brew transcripts with extra content, Liberation Martial Arts Online, as well as our private chat group on Discord. You can also make one-time donations at Ko-Fi or show your solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com.
Yeah, I definitely am gonna second a lot of what Mike said, mainly just because like my main motivation for going to Thailand, one was really just to travel, very similar, even though I grew up in a wealthier area, doesn't mean that like I had the type of wealth that like a lot of my classmates and the people I grew up with. Like both my parents had to work a lot in order to provide my siblings and I the life that we had. So it wasn't like shit wasn't easy. And when I was doing Muay Thai, my goal was to go to Thailand and I wanted to stay like long term because I really wanted to like fight in the stadiums as a youth. Like I was watching like Sanchai, Buikao, Singdam, who else? Like Pet Bunju. I was watching Yadvicha. I was watching a lot of those guys growing up and I was like 13, 15 and I'm like, yeah, I want to fight at this level too. And that sounds good on paper. There's nothing wrong with aspiring to fight in the stadiums and win a stadium title. But because of the culture surrounding like Westerners who travel to Muay Thai in Thailand, rather than that being like something like, yeah, let's get you to develop the skills to win a stadium title, it's automatic. It almost like starts getting smoothed out and denigrated into like, yeah, I just want to go to Thailand and I just want to beat up on some Thais to show how good I really am. And that's what that eventually morphs into for a lot of people. And same with Mike, even though my main goal for going to Thailand was to improve myself, I'd just be lying if I said that I initially thought that like, yeah, if I can beat a Thai, that means I'm legit at this because that's just ingrained in the culture of Muay Thai in the West, period. And to assume that's just gonna like I'm the special person that doesn't affect, that's just ridiculous. Despite my upbringing and where I'm coming from, you know, there's a lot of people who who don't rock with a lot of white supremacist shit, but because if you live in a society that kind of glorifies and gives a pass to a lot of white supremacists, you might believe some shit that is really problematic because it's like a fish being in water. You don't know you're in water until somebody points it out to you. Because why would you even think about it at that point? But I really think it's important to like just assess like where like not only where you're traveling to, but why you're doing it. And even though I was way more political at 2020 than I was like beforehand in terms of my training, I wasn't as political as I am now. And even like how I view Thailand in 2020 is much different than I view now, which I'm happy that I went there. And my experience there was honestly great. I really needed that at that point in my life because that was my dream to go to Thailand and just train and not have any responsibilities to worry about. Especially, I had I was almost getting ready to get my associate's degree. I've been in and out of school. My fighting career kind of went down the shitter. I wasn't doing that well in a lot of fights, so I figured whether I fight or not, I do got to make this trip because if I don't make it now, then I'm gonna regret it for the rest of my life. And I learned so much going there, and I wish I would have stayed there longer had it not been for the pandemic to really just immerse myself in the country and really learn. But even while I was there, I realized very quickly, and especially it was funny, I realized after my fight, even though I lost my fight, that's the funny part, I lost my fight, but then afterwards, even though I lost, I'm like, it's crazy how I viewed like fighting a Thai person. And the Thai that I fought was really experienced. At the time, I was only at like 29, 30, I think like 29, 28 fights, like amateur fights. But I believe they were an older Thai gentleman who had almost about a little over 100 fights. So big experience gap, but the fight wasn't I didn't get completely dominated the whole fight. And I was in the fight, even though I got dropped in the first round, I was in the fight the whole time. So ironically, after that experience, I was like, man, back home, people make such a big deal about fighting a Thai, but it's there's good Thais, there's average Thais, there's bad Thai fighters, there's great Thai fighters, there's all-time great Thai fighters. I mean, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but it reminds me of how, like, even the most well-meaning white person, well-meaning whatever that even means, well, they look at like a tall black dude. Oh, this guy must play basketball. It's kind of that mentality.
Oh, if I could beat this guy, I'm really good.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, dude, I beat a black dude.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how good I am.
That is exactly what it is. Even like in boxing, the whole Great White Hope thing, you see that a lot. Like the Great White Hope trope in boxing is kind of like almost evolved itself in a different way in Muay Thai, where rather than looking for like the Great White Hope to beat like I don't know like a Jack Johnson or whatever all time great black boxer that was dominating motherfuckers at the time, whoever it will be, but like rather than that, it's more so like we got to go to where they're at and beat them at their game because at the end of the day we're the real superior ones. We got to put them in their place. They won't be that explicit about that, but it's kind of that same mentality when it's like it's funny to me personally. Like it's problematic, but it's also funny because despite how many foreigners, specifically Americans, and I'm speaking about this from an American centric concept, and I'm glad you brought this up, Mike, because that confirmed what I thought after my experience in Thailand, and that just gave me some confirmation that like it's funny to me that Americans think they have figured out the game of Muay Thai when these motherfuckers haven't even figured out the game of MMA. Like, you know what I'm saying? They haven't even figured out boxing. Like, yet you all of a sudden you've got it figured out in a country where you're not even gonna bother to learn the language. I was only there for a month and I'm like learning basic terminology and I'm talking to people who have been there for years who are like, oh wow, that's cool that you're speaking the language. I don't even like want to bother to learn Thai. And I bet you money this is the same motherfucker at home telling people who are immigrants here are like, oh, they need to learn how to speak English. It's even like the whole dichotomy between like an immigrant and an expat. Like, what actually is the difference between an immigrant and an expat? Like, let's really examine that. Because somehow in like Muay Thai, every foreigner is an expat, and then I see in the news like, this illegal immigrant was caught in Thailand, and it always happens to be some dark skinned individual, whether it be like a Nigerian man or like an Indian person. But the white Europeans and the Americans, they're expats, because they got money. That's what that means. Like, so I noticed a lot of that while I was over there, like just the term, even like little terminology things. And to continue this conversation to keep it consistent with the topic, I remember I had this brought up to me, and this is I'm not gonna shit on any one individual because they weren't trying to say it in an offensive manner because these were people of color telling me this. These were not white people telling me. These are actually people of color who were trying to look out for my best interests, but it exposed something to me that really like I've been thinking about a lot, and I think about it more and more now that I have time to reflect and I'm more politically educated. And I remember when I was in Thailand. Right now, I have shorter hair. I got like a smaller afro growing out. But when I was in Thailand, I had dreadlocks. They weren't super long at the time, but they were long enough. They were getting to the point where I could like tie it back, right? And I know before I was going there, a couple of people alluded to me. I'm not gonna name names, but a couple of people alluded to me. It's like, have you thought about like getting a haircut before you go? And I'm like, what the fuck would I get a haircut before I go? What's the point? And I'm thinking, my innocent ass thinking, I'm like, well, probably concerned that it's like too hot out there, you know? And it was very hot out there. Probably would have been wise to cut my hair just for that. But that's not what they were concerned about it. They were concerned about it because they were like, they might not like let you fight at like certain stadiums if you have like longish hair, or it might like kind of look at you funny. And it's like, I'm like, oh, it's funny that I'm like, so basically I can't be too black out there, basically, which is very funny to me because while I was out there, the the Thais who were the nicest to me, a lot of the Thais were nice to me too. I will say that. Like it was, I love being out there as far as getting to actually talk to and like mingle with actual Thai fighters, residents of Thailand. Like I definitely wish I could have stayed longer because I learned so much, especially just as far as like the international context. And but it was funny how if you're for black listeners, there's a thing that black people do. We call it like the nod, where when we see each other in a public space, or we're the only like two or three people there, but we all see each other and we're like looking at each other like, "Yeah, what's up, man?" Or like, "How you doing? How you doing, brother?" Like stuff like that. A lot of black people do that in public when we're around white spaces. But ironically, a lot of the dark skinned Thais kind of did that with me. They were going out of their way to make me feel comfortable because even like something at like whiteness is valued a lot out there, not necessarily in the same way as America, but a lot of this shit is imposed because of fucking foreigners. Because Thailand is a country in Southeast Asia. A lot of these people are darker than me. I'm black. A lot of these people are darker than me. Yet, if you watch the TV, a lot of these actors, models, and whatnot are pale, like really pale, like paler than people who live in a very sunny place should be. And I'm like, that doesn't really make any sense. Most of the Thais I've seen are like pretty like brown or dark skin. That's weird.
We've actually talked about that in previous episodes about how Western tourism affects a country as far as colorism and I guess from colorism, white supremacy. Like we talked about that with the history of Cuba, but also like Latin America, South Asia, where because of the tourists, you put the lightest skinned people at the front of the house, right? There's this idea of the front of the house and the back of the house. It's not because you think that they'll like that more. It's because they're demanding that. They want the lighter skinned locals, natives to be at the front. Those are the people they want to deal with. Colorism might already exist, but that exacerbates the colorism there.
100%.
That then starts elevating certain groups over other groups. But not only that, then it also changes like the local even dynamics of what is considered beautiful. All of those things starts getting affected by Western tourism.
Yeah, it was making me think of like even just going shopping, like, you know, when you're going out into the malls and you know, when you confront like for instance, like I like lotion. I lotion up as much as I fucking can.
Oh, I know where this is getting ready to go.
Yeah, and like going to Tesco and you go into the store or any supermarket or any pharmacy or whatever, and you're just trying to get some lotion that doesn't fucking have skin whitening agents in it is like fucking impossible. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I ain't going fucking lighter on my skin. Like, I like my brown skin. I ain't like, if anything, I want it to get darker. I don't want it to get lighter. And I was just sort of immediately sort of like guffawed by like how much of their skin beauty products, that kind of whole area of commerce is just shaped by a desire to be white. And yeah, it was really just like, it was like, even without like kind of the political awareness I have now, like even back then I knew like, this is fucked up.
I have seen some articles where it's like attributed some of like the beauty standards of not just Thailand, but like Asia in general to Korea. But the thing is like what they don't realize is those like white beauty standards that Korea has came from the US specifically. It came from not only from the GIs, but also Korea has a history of sex trafficking, sex tourism. The comfort women stations never closed down after Japan left the US and its proxies kept them open. So these US military doctors created these programs to, this is their words, to de-orientalize the women. They purposely wanted lighter skinned women with bigger eyes, basically making them more Western. And then that became kind of like a standard for Korea. And from there, because the West valued that type of beauty so much, then of course that spread to other parts of Asia. So people are like, oh, no, this isn't a white thing. This is like an Asian thing. Yeah, we're just getting it for Koreans. And it's like, motherfucker, Korea got her, not even from Europe. They got it from white Americans, right? Specifically, it wasn't even accidental. It was an actual project to de-orientalize women, and especially, I don't even want to say sex workers because that makes it sound like they had some kind of consent in the process, right? It was sexual slavery, and they wanted the sexually enslaved Asian women who were still enslaved after Japan. They wanted to keep them like that. And then they wanted to now like control even how they looked. And then this even connects to like the adoption industrial complex. It's like, oh, now you have kids. We don't want that around. So like, let's illegally send them off to the US and Europe and whatnot. And there's like a whole truth and reconciliation commission happening about that too. But sometimes I hear people who went to Korea and it's like, no, I went to Korea, man. That's a Korean thing, right? That's not from the US. And it's like, dude, and even some Koreans think that. They don't know the origins of how these things started.
And I was just thinking, like, to further that point, like even today, certainly now it also like connotates not just, the social capital that comes with, a person's proximity to whiteness, but also like it signifies class as well. Because from what I understand, like, if you're darker skinned, it probably means you're working outdoors in a lot of cases, in agricultural industries. And, there's like the associations, if you're browner, you're of a lower, class, I suppose. And so like, yeah, that also complicates it a little bit as well, because, certainly when you kind of see how people sort of gravitate towards, wanting to look white and be white, it's just to signify as well, like, I'm not that person as well. So it creates these interesting internal sort of divisions within Thai culture as well.
Colorism is real, which is the uplifting of lighter skinned people of the same ethnic group. But colorism is also used to harm reduce racism. When you look more closely at the colorism spectrum, you often find rich Chinese who fled communism on one end and South Asians on the other, or European settlers and rich descendants and South Asians or Native people or Afro-Latinos. It's still often racism. But again, with the Western gaze, it's easy to put everyone in the same bucket and paint it as colorism within the same ethnic group. Also, light-skinned foreigners and settlers create a new pole or aspiration for colorism, which is what I mean by it also makes colorism worse, because foreign whiteness means power and privilege. To quote Frantz Fanon, to be rich is to be white is to be rich. But Mike, something you spoke to earlier about how the West comes to Thailand, or maybe you could even say to the East, with this mentality that the East is theirs to use. And this is often known as Orientalism. But from your standpoint, you're probably also very familiar with the noble savage trope. Did you notice any of that?
Absolutely. I found this, like, there's a lot to unpack here, but I found that the most obvious thing that comes to mind when people think about me as a Muay Thai fighter is the names that they choose to come up with to give me like a fight name. And it's always something like that conveys something like mystical native person, like the shaman or the it's just something that was sort of like that owes itself to sort of tropes that people think about native people. And certainly that sort of carries itself in terms of how people like treat you, right? And it's interesting being native in Thailand for lots of reasons, because how Thai people look at you can immediately tell. It's like distilled through the prism of the white Western gaze. And that creates like issues right off the hop.
It was kind of like bidirectional, right? Because you also had a bit of that to them and they had that towards you.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting thing, right? Like, and as I was sort of, navigating that space, people often came up to me curious, because the first thing people would do, often Thai people come up to do, they speak Thai to me. Like this racial ambiguity that I have, meant that often I was confronted with a lot of situations where, this happens. Like if I go to the local Mexican grocer, right? Like, it's as soon as I walk in, it's like, hola, and it's like, sorry, it's like, I'm Korean, but anyways, it's just it creates like these interesting sort of interactions that I tend to look a lot more favorably on now. But back then, when I met people in Thailand, often the first thing is like, oh, like what are you? Like they need to put me in a box first of all. It's like, are you like they just didn't know, right?
They knew you weren't white.
Yeah, they knew I wasn't white. But like to see their brains short circuit to try and figure out, okay, what area of the global south do I need to put you in? And so the interesting thing is that, like, the only way I could convey like who I was to people in Thailand, I realized was almost like impossible because they had no proxy, to understand native folks outside of even Western media, right? Like things that they had. Most often I found like I was the very first native person a lot of Thai people met. And unfortunately, they informed that experience. Like I informed my experience interacting with them with, my predispositions. They came in with theirs. But unfortunately, um, you know, especially even in 2008, certainly, like, media representations of Indigenous people were poor at best. And certainly when you go into that space, like, they're coming in with like, assuming that you're just coming straight off the set of Dances with Wolves with Kevin Costner, right? Like I've seen some pretty offensive things that people have like said to me, Thai people have said to me, but I don't really like harbor any sort of ill will against them because like they're literally only using what proxies they have to try to give some substance to who I am, and it's like, yeah, like that was really challenging, like, trying to like convey to people who I was as a person and where I came from. My standpoint as a Cree person was pretty much impossible to convey to a lot of people in Thailand just because, like they just didn't know anything about Native people, really.
From their framework, trying to understand a person without a country because the country was taken, right? Or the land was taken, I should say. Then from your positionality, really going to a lot of places in the world, that's going to be harder for people to understand because it's like, that is something that happened to you. When your land is taken, now the rest of the world will have a hard time placing you because you don't have a place. Even that term, placing you need a place, but these settlers took the place. So then now you'll forever be an alien of the planet.
And I very rarely like to tell people I'm Canadian, like that comes with all sorts of baggage that it, like, even saying it just feels wrong, and, but, when you're traveling overseas, it's like, it's shorthand, right? Like, it's like, yeah, I'm Canadian because I don't want to have to go through like, a 40-minute lecture on the complicated political dynamics of like being Indigenous in a settler colonial space, right, or a settler occupied space rather, and yeah, it's hard to sort of be Indigenous in places that have little to no understanding of who you are. And like you made a really good point, like when you're like occupied people, which is currently kind of what we are, right? We're sitting in a territory that, despite the rhetoric around treaties and like, this amicable exchange of knowledge and resources for the benefit of sharing of land, that's such a romanticized like idea. But really the reality is it's horrendous oppression and occupation of our territories that were never ceded. And it makes it difficult for people to sort of grasp that because, like, you already can kind of see through, like, you kind of hit the nail right on the head, Sam. Like, if you don't have a country to call home, people have no latch or no hook to sort of tether you to, right? And that makes it, really, difficult to sort of travel overseas being Indigenous because, like, I was just remembered a trip I went to. I have a Scottish uncle, and the reason for that is a long story I won't get into, but my last trip overseas to Scotland, we were hanging around this mutual friend of my uncle's, and it was just like right off the bat, when as soon as she found out I was Native, she was just like, "Oh, like, so you do like sweat lodges and stuff, right? Can you teach me how to do that?" And I was like, "What the fuck?" Like, first of all, that would create like that. There's so much wrong with that. Like, there were so many ethical issues with how that statement was even conveyed. Like, that would never fly back home. Like, you're breaching so much protocol in even just stating like that. But that's just something you got to sort of contend with being Native traveling overseas, is that these racist exchanges that you have to deal with are just sort of part and parcel, come with territory, I guess.
Especially when you're not in the West, kind of like what you were explaining with your origin and your background about being tied to the land, like you're part of the land, right? That's the framework for a lot of people, right? They see people as being part of the land or tied to the land in some way. So when they find people who are like, they don't recognize the land, never been told about this land, or you don't have a land, it's harder to understand. Even though it's like pointed back at you, it's like that's kind of also how you perceive things as well, like historically, right? But then, like, I think for Europe, they're not so tied to the land. It's like wherever they go, it starts becoming their land. Or to the example you gave of Americans, they come with this American bubble. Wherever they go, America comes with them. So it's like a very different framework, a very different standpoint from how they understand it. So then if they say the same kind of stuff, they're coming from a different place where it's like, they're not trying to like place you to a land or whatever. They're just like turning you into this cartoon character.
Yes.
That is theirs to cartoonify, that they own your likeness and image.
Totally.
But the other question then to that idea of like the noble savage is, have you seen that with the foreigners placed the other way towards the Thai people as like this, oh, they're so beautiful, this beautiful culture. But then, yeah, their kids, they're warriors. They're fighting since they're 3 years old.
Oh, man.
Yeah, totally. That's like, oh my God, like there's so much to talk about there.
Dude.
Yeah, like I think it speaks to the same vein of thought, like that we were talking about earlier, in that sense that, the Orientalism and like, viewing Asian bodies as something to be disposed of or used, and like that, like that approach, like, and I think romanticism is sort of like the other side of the same coin, so to speak, right? Like, I remember, there's like this, a lot of folks go to Thailand not to train martial arts, and that kind of surprised me, but a lot of folks go out there to do like these wellness programs. Yoga.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so the type, man, like you're sitting in a restaurant and then you're looking over and then you see this person, and then like they go out there just because they have this idea of what Thai culture can offer them, and it's purely extractionary, right? Like they're not going there to like contribute to the country in any meaningful way. They're coming there to strip mine their spirituality because, well, one, they don't understand it to begin with, and two, it's speaking to some essential lack that that like white culture has like built into it, and that's the attitude people have. Especially I notice, like, the propensity for people to go to Buddhist temples is something I really bothers me. I'm trying to like, and I suppose I fell into some of those similar trappings, but like I already had a propensity for spirituality. Being indigenous, I felt there was a lot of corollaries within Buddhism that was really sort of attracting me to learn more about it. So I spent some time trying to learn more about Buddhism while I was in Thailand, and it was such a, it was an enriching experience, trying to, take in the books, trying to have conversations, trying to understand, what I found like quite rich concepts, but like seeing white spiritualists come into that place and then just sort of in a highly sort of commodified environment in a very extractive kind of manner, it sort of, it renders Thai people like almost like these mythological figures, that are devoid of, the complexity of what human beings are really all about. And it sort of robs you of a lot of things. And it makes me feel like that's that noble savage thing. It's like people see you as that idea, that character that they have in their head, and it completely robs you of your interiority as a human subject. And I think certainly that carries into like, people's attitudes towards child fighting, which is, such a problematic thing. People will say that, going back to what we were saying earlier, like, somehow like, Thai people are this sort of like, I don't know if this is true or not, like take this with a grain of salt, but I remember hearing something, and this, this is a bit of a historical statement. I know it is, but I remember hearing something a Thai person told me once a while back, and it was like, oh, we're the country that was never conquered, right? And I think some people have that like misconception about Thailand. It's like it was a country that somehow got to where it is today without imperialism, which is interesting, and yeah, it's messed up. And so, anyways, like when people have this like attitude towards Thai culture, their people, their spirituality, and it extends to, how they even look at their children. Because, when you see an immediate contradiction when you go watch child fighting in Thailand. Like the card I fought on, my very first fight in Thailand, there was like, it was almost all kids who were fighting before me. And So you're immediately confronted with the contradiction of seeing something is wrong, right? Especially when you consider like the gambling aspect about it. That's what really creates an immoral situation, and it really puts you in like this weird spot. Like I remember that first feeling I had when I was watching it. And here I am participating in this event that has like this really shady thing going on, and I think a lot of Westerners can shrug it off because it's just like, well, Thai bodies and Thai people and Thai culture are just sort of like these like they're not humans, like they're just sort of others that are somehow I'm thinking like the beasts of burdens or like the noble savage, like their bodies are built for violence, or on the other side of things, like they see them as like these magical things, that people can travel to Thailand and sort of get this, spiritual sort of import from. Like, I don't know, I'm not explaining myself very well.
Get the best hospitality, get the best massages, right? Get pampered. They're the masters of pampering and the masters of violence.
Literally saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
I mean, when you mentioned wellness and spirituality, another thing I wanted to mention is often people go there, and I've known people in LA who do this. They go to Thailand to go to some wellness spiritual retreat that's all based around yoga, and they don't see anything funny about that because they're like, oh, yoga, and Thailand, it's all from that general area. They don't even know that these are like different things from different regions. And they also go there for yoga plus surfing. And it's like to Thailand for that, right? And none of that sounds weird to them because to them, they just put anything, even I would say like native people get thrown into this bucket, even though they're indigenous to North America, right? It's like they're all the non-Occidental. They're all in the non-white bucket. So it's like the yoga, surfing. You've seen this in spiritual practice. They'll take like South Asian practices mixed in with like bastardized indigenous practices. And it's like all the same bucket. It's all the same shit, right? So for them, there's no contradiction to go to Thailand for LA style yoga and surfing, right? Along with like the best massages and like your keto, whatever diet, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's like, they're saying namaste and burning sage at the same time. It's just like,
oh man, good Lord. To add to that point too, I'll do you one better, Sam. There are fucking foreigners. I'm not going to name any names. I don't even need to name any names because we know who they are. There are foreigners who are running Muay Thai retreats in Thailand and charging people for it. White people doing this in Thailand. It's like, how exploitative can you fucking get? Like, how low can you get? And the worst part is that if I were to bring this up in the mainstream, I'd be the one that gets shat on the most and be like, oh, you're just hating. You're not, he's like, you're just hating on somebody who's trying to make a living off their dream. It's like, dude, fuck you, man. Like, you moved to a cheap country with a cheap cost of living where everybody exists to please your white ass. And not only do you do that, you have the audacity to start a business there involving their national sport, and you're extracting money away from them from the shit that you learned from your Thai trainers, the Thai fights, the shit that you did out there. Now you're profiting off of it in their own country. I mean, how American can you get?
Traditional knowledge, right? They're using traditional knowledge for their own benefit.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, calling out the colonizer for colonizing is it's a quick recipe for uninvited shit coming into your life, man.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they don't even call it colonizing anymore. It's just hustle and grind.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Another thing I want to bring up, right, is going to Thailand isn't just about the Muay Thai, isn't just about the wellness and spirituality, right? But there's also the sex tourism side for it, which even people there for Muay Thai or even wellness might participate in, right? I was watching this interview with Michael Bisping and Robert Whitaker, and Michael Bisping was saying every time he goes to Thailand, he always sees white guys from Australia there. And then he's like, some of my friends in Australia, man, they go to Thailand. They don't ever come back. And then Robert Whitaker is like, yeah, they're not just there for Muay Thai. They're there for other stuff. And they just started like looking at each other and giggling. And you know what they were talking about, that some of their friends, some of the people they know are really like addicted to or obsessed with the sex tourism there. And they just can't help themselves. But they don't see it as exploitive. They just see it as just normal. just because it's normalized does not mean it's good, right? And so amongst the people they know, that is normalized, right? So to kind of like bring this all back together and connect the dots, everything you're talking about, Mike, and even you, Ron, right, is this Western conquest, conquer the men and then sexually conquer the women. And for sexual imperialism, they can watch the children fight and they can even sleep with the children. They can conquer them too, which is a colonial process. Defeat the men, and the women and children are the spoils. So these are the not so pleasant side of things that's normalized and never brought up by Western tourists. But going back to Ron's initial comments about like you're bragging about or talking about the worst parts as being the beauty of Thailand, right? Like oftentimes those things, those exploitive things are the things people brag about as being like the great thing or the beautiful thing about Thailand.
Yeah, no, like that's like I think it's important to bring up like when I first went to Thailand, I didn't really maybe it was just like circumstance or just maybe just in terms of how I was navigating the country at that time. I didn't really see the sex tourism side of things on my first trip out there. I was really kind of like cloistered in my camp, and I had a lot to do with the fact that I was just like pretty much broke that whole trip, and so I couldn't really afford to go out. But my second trip, certainly when I stayed in Bangkok, it was I kind of struggling to find the words. When I first seen like this old fucking white guy, he must have been in his like fucking 50s, 60s, and I swear like he was walking holding hands with this girl who was probably no more than like, she looked honestly like 10 or 12 to me. But it was like stuff I kind of knew to prepare myself for things that I kind of said. Like I always knew like, oh yeah, sex tourism is an issue in Thailand. I know there are child sex slaves in Thailand. I know that that's an issue. I was kind of like wholly still unprepared to see it in person because I always thought it was kind of like more clandestine. But then when I walked in certain areas like Pattaya, for instance, it was just sort of like in your face, and I was just kind of like, this can't be how it is. And without, I'm quite certain, like every instance where I saw, this huge age disparity was always some greasy old white guy, having some very young Thai girl on his arm. And it was like, and I saw that quite often. And like, I thought it was just more of a trope, but then I realized it was actually a real thing, and not just a real thing. It was like hugely, well, obviously it's problematic, but it came really to help me sort of better characterize or understand, why people chose to go to that country. Because like I was going into that place with rose-colored glasses too, and seeing the seedy underbelly of Bangkok really sort of and its outliers in Pattaya, for instance, like really sort of it's easy to talk about these things in abstract terms, right? Especially if you're from the West, we can read about these things, we can understand them, we can watch documentaries, we can kind of like, begin to like understand these issues. But when you see it in person, it leaves a weird imprint on you that like I could still remember like the feeling of the air on my skin when I saw that. I can still like viscerally remember. And I know like brain science says that, when you're undergoing like, like really intense things, like your brain sort of switches into this mode where like you can sort of like recall a lot of things about that particular event. And I was just thinking about that. Like it was such a, I don't know, it was such a disturbing thing to kind of see. And then like afterwards, I saw it everywhere, right? Like it's hard not to see the sex tourism industry in Thailand. And then, when you're walking around like Phuket, for instance, and you walk into sort of like these, not like red light districts, but they're areas where, like they have massage houses where, like that where prostitution's where it's going on. And like, and it's, it's a lot of Westerners kind of coming in and out of there, frequenting that place. And it's it's something it's hard to sort of prepare yourself for, but like when you're traveling overseas, when you're traveling to Thailand, it's something like, you can do your best to steel yourself against it, but when you see it in person, it was fucking really disturbing to see, man. And like I'm still trying to like, I don't know, it's a difficult thing, especially for person like myself, like, who is, I'm a second generation residential school survivor. The issues that Indigenous people had to confront when all their families were taken away, put into these residential schools, and like the amount of abuse that occurred between adults and children was a really triggering thing for me to have to go through in Thailand. It deeply affected me in really in not so great ways. And so in my experience being native in Thailand and kind of confronted with the reality of sex tourism was it was a really bitter pill to have to, or it was not the right way to say it, but it was just a really difficult reality to have to confront with. And more importantly too, as we were kind of talking today and kind of unpacking sort of our assumptions and our attitudes, and especially the gaze with which I look to Thai people, it's hard not to kind of see like that, it's I guess what I'm trying to say is it's really important to like unpack your motivations. We've been kind of saying that consistently throughout this episode, but like I think a lot of people can still like think that they're going to Thailand for the right reasons and still kind of fall into a trap where they think they're justified in participating in that industry, because like you'll tell yourself convincing little like narratives about like, oh well, you're just helping them out, or they're just kind of like they need money and stuff like that. So some people like will still participate in the industry on the basis of altruistic aims, right? Not sort of unpacking that, even in, unpacking the problems behind that itself,
Effective altruism, right? Which we all learned from like Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and all these like scams. It's all fraud, and it's just like a rationalization for exploitation and abuse. And my thing is, we're all coming from different positionalities, but we're all non-white, right? I'm coming from a position as a Korean person. We have Black American. We have a native person from Treaty 6. But what stands out to me are the tourists. It's the Westerners who go there, but never speak about the actual realities of their tourism, as if it's all a win-win situation. Basically, my indictment is on them, because it's like, how much bypassing did they do? Maybe they don't see it as often, but they're aware it exists. Or maybe they do see it, but then it's like they somehow bypass it and don't see it. It's like they see with their eyes examples of Western male exploitation of Thai children even. And somehow when they come back, it's like, that's not part of their experience at all. They somehow did not see it. It just bypassed their brains. So to them, it's like, what exploitation of Thailand by Western people? What are you talking about? They've never been conquered. So then what is happening with them, right? What's wrong with you for you to like not acknowledge that? Like, how are you dealing with this information, right? Like, how do you go there and talk about the beauty and all this stuff? And like, you're so defensive of any criticism of Thailand, but we're not criticizing Thailand. Pay attention. We're criticizing you. What's up with you? You're seeing the material conditions. You're seeing the exploitation by the West, and you're like denying that it happens, or not even rationalizing it. Somehow like it bypasses you and you don't even comprehend it.
Honestly, they're just lying, Sam. I'm gonna be real.
They did see it. They're not bypassing. They did see it.
Yeah.
It's still a point like you're mentioning right now. I'm not even gonna, because you're 100% right. Because I feel the exact same way, and I'm like, look, man, I get that I'm just gonna view things differently, especially as a Black person who grew up in America. But there are certain things that you just like, bro, there is no way that you stayed in Thailand for as long as you did and did not see any of that. So you're just special. You're just an angel. You didn't do shit wrong.
And the thing about it is that stands out, right? So how are you not mentioning it every day? How is this not brought up more often?
It's when you read the pamphlets of like going to Thailand, you see like, pictures of beautiful beaches and, and good food. And like, you have like this, for the martial artists, who want to go out there, you got the best training camps in the world, and it's all sort of great. But like immediately, like it's thrown upon you, like that immediate contradiction, and like how people cope with that tells a lot about their attitudes and what they're bringing to the country. Because I think for people to see it as a problem is to admit a lot of things that a lot of people who go to Thailand will just completely either deny or obfuscate or just outright fucking lie about, right? Like, I was talking earlier about like the fact that, when I was training as Master Toddy, there was a lot of Americans training there. And it was like, I immediately fucking knew which conversations to avoid like the plague, because it was very obvious to me that these guys were just like 3 out of 4 of them were like former or current military. And so like I was just like, okay, that's a landmine. Don't fucking go there. And it was like, to admit that you see these issues is to admit the West's complicity in creating the conditions that allow it to happen. And I think like that's just a bridge too far for most people. So it's like we play this selective amnesia when it comes to seeing the more unsavory aspects of Thai culture or Thai living. And unfortunately, it's the shitty aspects about it are fundamentally fueled by, well, capitalism and white supremacy, right? Like there's white tourists traveling to Thailand with the explicit intention to participate in the sex tourism industry. And even if they're going there for Muay Thai, let's not delude ourselves into thinking that when you brought up that conversation earlier, with Michael Bisping, was that a lot of people, yeah, they go there for the fighting, but I mean, really, it's kind of like secondary to the need to want to participate in the sex tourism industry as well.
I mean, it's all part of masculinity, right?
Totally.
I mean, they're going there, especially the men are going there for these like toxic masculine reasons often. I mean, there is this beauty, the spirituality, right? But wanting to go there and fight and whatever and prove you're the best, that in itself is like, there's a lot to unpack there. At face value, that might sound okay, like it's about competition, but yeah, I don't know if you're going there because you're a competitor. And then like even going back to the topic of child fighting, right? Talking about banning it or whatever, that's a different conversation. We don't even need to go there. But the problem I have is when people talk about it using the framework, going back to like Noble Savage and stuff like that, is of bioessentialism. Like it's genetic. Like they were just born to do that. And no analysis of the conditions creating this.
The brain without materialism.
When they talk about like culture, they don't mean culture in this like academic way. They mean culture interchangeably with DNA. Even when they say culture, they really mean they're just born like that.
Yep.
That's just how Thai people are born. They're just born to do that. Going back to bioessentialism, as if like there's different humans on this planet instead of just like one type of human, and they all become different because of the conditions that they came up in.
Yeah. And that kind of like, that evokes a memory that I have around when I first started attending martial arts events, like before I went to Thailand, I first got started cutting my teeth, I suppose, in like tournaments, like martial arts tournaments, and in the prairies here, like that's really the only place where you get to actually like compete, which is like, karate tournaments, and they'll have like this event that it's, they'll call it like light kickboxing or kickboxing sparring or something like that. But that's generally where like you got your amateur experience, right? But and they would say it was light, but really like you were just kicking the living shit out of each other. Like it was like I never once competed in a kickboxing tournament, and it wasn't like pretty much full bore. Like you got basically disqualified only if you knocked a person out. And so pretty much everyone did everything short of doing that. Which was interesting. And so what I'm trying to say is that like when I first started attending these events, like I noticed that like there were indigenous competitors at them. But I often noticed that like, man, like these guys don't have professional trainers. They don't have adequate facilities to do their training within. And a lot of this is just these scrappy dudes from often northern Saskatchewan who want to fight, come in, and then get thrown to the literal wolves. And that's often how a lot of fighters, especially like in Saskatchewan, built up their fight record. It was against these like a lot of these like native kids who were just like scrappy, just wanted to fight, but had no like business being in the ring, if I'm being honest with you, right? Like, but there was no issue with the regulatory bodies or the coaches or the fight makers like allowing this to happen, knowing full well these guys shouldn't be fighting this person. Like this guy is, probably on his way to fighting for like a Canadian title, and he's fighting some like kid from La Ronge who's never probably actually had a professional coach. They just go in with like a scrappy attitude, and oftentimes, they make for some entertaining fights. But it was very obvious to me, like early on, that Indigenous people in martial arts in Saskatchewan, anyways, were kind of just fodder for other people's like athletic development, and they didn't really see us as competent athletes or people who were gonna like rise to that like that competitive level, right? Because you mentioned it earlier on, like fucking, like, training martial arts, it's a hella expensive like venture, and it's like it takes a lot of your time, your resources. Like it's a lot, and you need a. It's kind of like, it's that it takes a village to raise a child attitude. It's kind of like the same way. If you're going to develop as a Muay Thai athlete, it takes a lot of people around you to help nurture you into like into a good fighter. And a lot of in my experience, I've noticed, like, you have these guys who just desperately want to fight and probably could have done so well had they had those opportunities that some of these fighters in from, like you mentioned earlier, like these suburban guys who are coming in and, have a chip on their shoulder and want to, like, cut their teeth and end up fighting these guys who weren't professionally trained. And so, it does a disservice to martial arts overall, but it also says a lot about the ingrained sort of white supremacy of a lot of people within martial arts, because it was like, I was watching it and I don't know what kind of situation I'm trying to call into mind here, but it's just like when you're watching it and you're seeing like the clear discrepancy in their skill sets, and even just like, they're walking to the ring and you can tell the guy who has like, he has like the fight team jersey on, or like the satin robe, and then like the other guy's coming in literally with just like some like torn up Billabong shirt, like shorts, and the guy supporting him. It's like, I admire the fucking like the tenacity, because like, man, hella respect to anybody who steps in the ring, because that's not easy to do. But like, it was like, as soon as the bell rang, you're just like, why the fuck did this even happen to begin with? Like, who the fuck thought this was a good idea? And like, they should be in prison right now because they're putting these poor kids at risk.
And it's the conditions. This reminds me of the same thing that happens in boxing, not just the story you're giving about Native people being fed as fodder, but also the expectations people go to Thailand with, which is that a lot of American boxers, when they need to pad up their record or they've been on a skid and they need some wins to get a better fight, they'll go down to Mexico. And of course, there's like a lot of great Mexican fighters, but that's not who they're going to fight, right? They go there because they could find a bunch of really poor Mexican fighters, and they know the job. It's not a fixed fight, but they know they're mismatched and they're going to go in there to get beat up, but they'll get paid, right? And so they go down there and they like fight 4 or 5 times, all wins, and then they could come back and get better fights. But now they've padded up their record. But then for them, even though for these fighters, they know that these are just like people being fed to them, right? Just fodder. They still feel proud, right? Because they're like kind of going almost parallel to Thailand. Oh man, if I go to Mexico and beat a Mexican boxer, then I'm a badass boxer, because Mexicans, like, everybody knows they're the toughest, best boxers, and I beat them, so I'm the best, right? And I'll bet to a certain degree, there's probably some of that with beating Native fighters in Saskatchewan, where it's like, oh, everybody knows Native people are warriors, right? It's in their blood. They're warriors, and I beat the warriors. This used to be their territory. I beat them in their territory.
Yeah.
What does that make me, right? I'm the conqueror. I'm the man, right?
Yeah, and I should also add too, there's an additional context that I think people who are not from this area, might not understand or appreciate, because like I grew up like I said before, like, small town Saskatchewan. It was like farming community. Hockey is like the sport. Like, I mean, it's it's like stereotype, it's religion, but I mean, it's true for the most part. I mean, like, sporting events in Saskatchewan, particularly when it comes to hockey, really exposes the racial divide. So when you, like, growing up, going to hockey games was just the thing you did on weekends, right? Like, Friday it's this town against this town, and people would make the big pilgrimage. Sometimes you travel hours on end just to go to this town through rain, snow, you name it. Like, people, it's a big thing. And so when you show up to these, it's so weird, man, because I was just thinking to myself, like, looking back on it now, like, just how fucked up it is. But, when you had a white town competing against a res, because a lot of times, you have reserves that have, really good Aboriginal or Indigenous hockey players on it. And there's a lot of really good Native hockey players. And so they're really competitive, right? And so there was a lot of rivalries between, small white towns and their Indigenous communities that are usually kind of close by. And when you attend these games, it's like it's fucking wild, man. Like the stuff people would say in the stands, like just pure, just unfiltered vitriol, racist stuff that was just like, holy shit, like this, you would think it kind of belongs almost like in a different century or something like that. But no, it's just, it's just part and parcel of living in Saskatchewan when you're brown. But when you like, people would be like fighting in the stands, like people would be spitting on each other, like the hockey teams would be fighting each other, like the crowds would be fighting each other, the fights would carry out into the parking lot a lot of the times afterwards. And like, if you're the native team visiting the white town, like oftentimes you needed to get the fuck out of there super fast because you didn't want to hang around to see what would happen, right? Like you don't want to get shot, you don't want to get like fucking chased out of town or worse, and so like sport rivalries really like sports, especially hockey in Saskatchewan, really exposes just how toxic and racist this place really is. Because when you go to those hockey events, I haven't been to a hockey game in a lot of years, mind you, but certainly growing up in and around that, I just saw like how like fucked up that was, like seeing like white parents spit on brown kids, and like it was just sort of like that's just part of it. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because the fight community is, it's a different sport, but in Saskatchewan, when like when you go tend to an MMA event or a kickboxing tournament or whatever it happens, although not as pronounced or as overtly violent as some of the hockey games I attended, like it's very obvious. Like there's camps people fall into. You're either in like the native camp or the white camp, and it's like growing up and like and kind of watching these guys fight and like seeing a lot of these native athletes get fed as cannon fodder. It's like there's always like this immediate sort of dividing that happens. Like like I'm always gonna like cheer for the native guy because that was just like always what you're gonna do, because like I want him to win. I want the white guy to beat him. Like I mean that's just kind of like what I want it to happen. And in Saskatchewan, it's like because of just like the intense division between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people here, that becomes really exposed in sporting events. I find that's true in hockey, and it's just as true in martial arts. Although because martial arts is still very much a white dominated space, you're usually in the minority when you go to these events. So you got to be very cautious and careful in terms of how you express yourself, I suppose. But yeah, it was like, man, it's wild, like kind of watching like spectators in Saskatchewan martial arts, certainly in the early 2000s, was like, man, it was not accommodating, and it was frequently violent. And oftentimes, if you weren't careful, you had to be, you just have to be cautious in navigating those spaces, because the very real possibility of yourself getting into fights is just came with the territory.
If you love the Southpaw Project, become one of our financial supporters. It'll help us supplement the cost of running this project, the incredible time and energy we put into it 7 days a week, and you'll be giving us some breathing room, not only to juggle Southpaw with our day jobs, but also to expand Southpaw into other areas. We can't exist without your contributions. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at southpawpod.com. Now, since you're both from oppressed communities, how you saw your experiences in Thailand began to change. Let me start with you, Ron. When and why did your perception of your experience change, and how did it change? And I don't just mean in Thailand, but just your experiences in martial arts.
Definitely my experiences in martial arts really started to change like post 2016, because I was 2016. I was about 18, and when like Trump started coming into power, and everybody remembers this time specifically in America, especially people of color in America, because we always knew about like a lot of people of color didn't think that we lived in some like racial harmony, despite what certain people make it seem like that there was like some type of racial harmony post Obama era, even though that was the narrative being pushed for a while. A lot of people didn't actually believe that. But there was a noticeable difference when like Trump started getting more popular, that a lot of people of color immediately recognized just from the rhetoric that like a lot of white people, men and women too. This is gender neutral. A lot of white people were starting to like be like, yeah, finally, we don't have to shut up anymore about this. And then when I got back from Thailand, so the timeline, I was in Thailand January 2020. I got back around early February, right before the pandemic was official in the US. And official meaning the US did absolutely nothing to prepare, and we were pretty much fucked for a year and right now currently because we're still in it technically. But I digress. But during the pandemic, I remember specifically that like was struggling. Like I was like teaching Muay Thai was pretty much my only job at that point before I found another job later on in the fall that involved me like delivering like exercise bikes as a seasonal job to make some money that I was not making as a Muay Thai instructor. Even the money I was making was just not enough. So while I was like home, I like occasionally taught Zoom classes. I had a lot of time to myself to read, think to myself. And I also had a lot of time to be on social media, more time than I ever want to spend on social media anymore. And a lot of that has to do with the just insane shit that I was seeing people who even like white people who I originally thought were like, yeah, he's a normal guy. I don't expect him to be some like liberal, but I don't really think he cares that much. A lot of even like people like that were like basically becoming fascists overnight, like at the drop of a dime, just from being holed up in their homes. And especially once the gym started opening up and I started seeing people in person more, I realized that a lot of people just got more reactionary over the pandemic. Like just straight up, people just got more reactionary, and it became very noticeable within martial arts. And I'm not gonna name names, even though I don't like these motherfuckers. But there was a gym in my old area. I don't live there anymore, but there was a gym that was literally hosting like live stream Facebook pandemic, or as they say, quote unquote, pandemic parties. And these guys were like military dudes. They technically work for the U.S. government, and they're fucking like training. They were training all throughout the whole pandemic. The guy was open about it, basically saying, fuck what the government says. I can do whatever the fuck I want. The pandemic is BS. And there were a few people at the gym that I was at that was rocking with this dude, and some even left to go train with him. And the funny part is, a lot of people at my gym were shocked, but because of my experience as a black person, I knew exactly who was going there and who was going to switch to go there because I know they like that shit at the end of the day. And I got to be honest, after the pandemic, I really had no interest in teaching martial arts anymore because Northern Virginia specifically is like heavily populated with just military and police, just within the infrastructure of like a lot of money comes from like LEO in the military. For those who aren't familiar with Northern Virginia specifically, Northern Virginia is a suburb within Virginia, literally right outside of the DC area. And just to name a few companies, this will be familiar to a lot of our listeners: Raytheon, General Dynamics, State Department. I could take the Metro to the State Department, honestly. FBI headquarters in Virginia, like I believe there was like basically every three-letter agency you could think of is in Virginia. So there is pretty much no way you can avoid pretty much every martial arts gym in Virginia or DC caters to LEO. And the only one that I can think of that doesn't are actually Comrades of Southpaw, High Style Jiu-Jitsu. And that's it. But that's it. Literally one that I can name off from the top of my head. But like if you'll notice every gym has like discounts for law enforcement and all of this. Especially I started seeing a lot of this shit, and I peeped this post 2020. A lot of these people were starting to do this shit after the George Floyd protests, and that was kind of like the last straw for me. I'm like, I don't want to teach these people how to fight. That was kind of my like thing with martial arts. I'm not gonna use my skills to teach these people how to fight. And I was thinking about my experience in Thailand to kind of relate it back to that. I was like in Thailand only for a month. And then I started like thinking about, the travel restrictions and all that. And I'm like, man, why is it that despite all these people that go back and forth between Thailand, the United States Muay Thai scene has not improved really that much at all, despite how much talent we have going back and forth to Thailand. And it's not really helping our development as fighters, because the fighters that are good are just staying over there long term for whatever reason to make a name for themselves in Thailand. But if you're staying in Thailand, you're staying in Thailand. You're not really doing anything for the infrastructure of your own country. And which is funny because these are like the Patriots. These are the American Patriots. They don't even want to come back and help other help other like Americans who want to train Muay Thai, which is kind of funny to me. But on that note, it's like I don't want I don't want Muay Thai to be just another commodity that I feel I have to sell to people that I don't really want to use this martial art, because this shit can hurt people. I mean, there is a whole conversation around like, you know this, Sam, like people thinking that jujitsu was the key to helping solving police violence. And then you had people taking it a step further, being like, well, if they just train MMA, it's like, oh, you want to teach cops how to elbow, knee, ground and pound people? You got to be fucking kidding me, dude. Like, they already do that without training. So you just want them to be better at it? Like, you think because they know how to fight, they're gonna be less inclined to brutalize somebody that looks like me? Because I can, like, this isn't even like me being cocky, but I guarantee most cops can't fuck with me with when it comes to seeing hands. But it doesn't matter, because guess what? They have guns and I don't, and it's my story against theirs, and we see how that plays out in the news all the time. So if martial arts is about self-defense, if Muay Thai if it's about effectiveness in self-defense, how am I going to defend myself against a police officer? No matter how much Muay Thai, boxing, MMA, jiu-jitsu I know, it will not matter. I can't defend myself against that. I can't.
You're not allowed to.
Just from the virtue of my position and their position, I cannot protect myself. So what does that say about self-defense? And what does that say about how Westerners and specifically Americans view martial arts culture in general, especially considering so many big names, big figures in jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and MMA are all just extreme right-wingers who are want to promote self-defense and like protecting the weak. Protecting who? Like your own people? You don't even want to protect your own women, honestly, especially based on what we know about what's been going on in like the constant like sex pests and scandals in these jiu-jitsu, even Muay Thai gyms that I know of. You know, Muay Thai doesn't get a pass on that shit either. A lot of the sex scandal stuff falls on jiu-jitsu because it's more like out there. But Muay Thai does not get a pass at all on this too. I'll be the first to say that. They don't get a pass on that shit either.
And there's more Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools in the US. So just by the numbers,
Exactly.
the likelihood is higher, but that doesn't mean smaller martial arts aren't going to have those problems as well.
Exactly.
I actually like to point this out because there's a bias where people just think sexual assault only happens in Catholic churches, right? And this isn't to apologize for Catholic churches. No, like keep that energy, hold them accountable. But the amount of abuse that happens in other religions, because they're not centralized as one body, right? One bureaucracy, it gets ignored. Like here in the US, by the numbers, there's more reports of sexual assaults happening in Protestant churches than Catholic churches. Now, why is that? Because there's more fucking Protestant churches in the US. It is the dominant
Yep.
Christian religion. Catholicism is not the dominant religion here, right? So yes, it's a big problem, but it's like a big problem in a smaller Christian sect. But in the bigger sect, because it's not one church, right? Protestant is like more of an umbrella term, right? It happens more often, but because there's this bias towards like smaller things, or because it's not centralized or it's not one body. And also there's a journalistic bias because it's not one body. You don't want to cover it as much because you're like, oh, this individual church did this, that individual church did that, right? I'm bringing this up because to frame sexual assault in the martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, by the numbers, of course, there's going to be more of it because there's more Brazilian jiu-jitsu clubs in the US. And they're also centralized under the IBJJF. But that doesn't mean it's not happening in other martial arts like Muay Thai, karate, taekwondo, because I get messages and DMs from people in those other arts every week talking about their own experiences. So it happens, but it's like not easy to talk about because of that. Like to the same point about journalistic bias is I can't centralize it under one hub. So it's harder to talk about because you're just talking about school A, school B versus like this whole art.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it right on the head. It's like, you know, people just need to keep the same energy. Like you nailed it on the head. Like I see this a lot, specifically with like even like people in Muay Thai who are really trying to be well-meaning, but like in all honesty, even if they think they're like really left-leaning, in actuality they're just liberals. And I can tell because they never want to take it to the full extent, which is like, well, that's just what those jiu-jitsu guys do. And it's like, yeah, you hang out, you train at the same gym.
Why do I have to call out my gym? I called out jiu-jitsu. My job is done.
Like you train at the same gym as the jiu-jitsu guys, because guess what? I have yet to meet. I train at like the only standalone like Muay Thai gym in my area, and even that in and of itself is rare. A gym that only does Muay Thai. So like this notion that like jiu-jitsu is like this unique thing that like Muay Thai is just better than as far as the social structure. It's like, as far as I'm concerned, as long as y'all are both residing in America, y'all probably gonna end up doing the same shit and believing in the same shit. And because y'all train with each other,
they all know each other anyway.
Like y'all know each other.
Mike, why did your perceptions about training start to change?
Well, I guess there's like, I like to think of it in like probably phases. So the first phase where I think my ideas around Muay Thai really started to change was because I was doing my master's degree from about 2009 till 2012-ish, 13-ish. And I wrote, actually, my master's thesis was around martial arts pedagogy, and specifically like training Muay Thai. And it was like an autoethnography, and it really sort of forced me to seriously evaluate all sorts of issues that previous to that I had really not, maybe contemplated, here and there, but not really took it seriously. And I should note that like the academic environment that was being sort of nurtured within was like quite, I would say, more in the radical tradition. Like I was being, like around that time when I was writing this, Idle No More came about. And for those who might not know, Idle No More was like a major indigenous movement that manifested in and around that about like 2012-ish, I think. And and a lot of this was in response to, at that time, the conservative government's just wholesale shitty approach to dealing with indigenous rights, land. And so, yeah, like there's a lot of mobility, a lot of political consciousness raising at that point in time. And I think I definitely was influenced by that. And so that was definitely shaping my interactions with Muay Thai more, because I was starting to unpack, these, like these issues around class, gender, race. And it was like, so yeah, like, so I was writing my master's, I had to reflect on some of these things, but I was such like a neophyte, and I think I was so like not super steeped in these ideas in a lot of ways, or not super refined. And I'll be honest with you too, I just wanted to get that damn thing written. I changed my thesis topic like 7 times. When it came right down to it, I just wanted to get that fucking thing out of my life. And like, I'm currently writing my PhD, and like that's like pretty much the same attitude I have right now. I'm like, when I started it, I wanted to write like a world-changing sort of thing, but now I'm just kind of like, I'm kind of more following this euphemism that my PhD supervisor tells me. He says like the best dissertation is a finished dissertation.
I like that.
So yeah, when I wrote it, I kind of wanted to get it done quick, so I didn't, I think, explore some of these things more in depth. But like I look back on it now, and like Sam, when me and you were sort of exchanging messages, and I started to look back on some of these ideas, I started kind of peeling open some of my dissertation, and some of it kind of like, kind of made me cringe, because like, I wouldn't write that nowadays. Some of it was like, man, like there were some interesting observations in there, but so that was kind of like the first phase where I kind of really started to, I suppose, start looking at myself more critically, especially because I'm a native guy coming from an oppressed community. And I think, there's an assumption when you travel to Thailand or when you go overseas that somehow, you can carry that same context with you elsewhere. And to a certain extent you do. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you think you're absolved of participating in colonial practices when you yourself are a colonized subject, and you think that somehow absolves you, you know? And certainly, like, I started to think about that more critically, but I've been to Thailand about like 9 times, but I did about 9 visits. Usually I try to go once a year to kind of, sharpen my skills. But during that time from about 2011 till about 2018, that's when I really started unpacking things a lot more. And I'd say definitely, well, and like this is a total plug to you, Sam. Like, I think a lot of this stuff tying my explicit sort of political consciousness that was being incubated within like the Idle No More work, because what I do professionally has a lot to do with policy work. I do a lot of work with government, and so my experience has typically been to sort of go to battle with like government, right? And so I kind of, looked at sort of Muay Thai and in martial arts spaces as sort of a place to escape some of that. But really, you know, saying a place, when people say leave your politics at the door is sort of in itself a political statement, right? Because you're really only saying like leave your inconvenient aspects about yourself at the door while we can enjoy the space that we specifically curated for our own comfort, right? But yeah, like when I kind of like in the last few years, especially like when the Southpaw Facebook group was open, it was like, man, it was like, honestly, it was a breath of fresh air, because I had so many shitty experiences growing up in a place that I simultaneously loved and valued and had enormous benefit to me. Being the person who I am and like the particular issues I brought into the gym, martial arts has been a lifesaver, like a literal lifesaver for me. And so there's conflict that, comes about when I look at my relationship to my gym and my coaches and my peers and my training partners. And it's just like my attitudes, like I think I started to get just call it a little bit more brave, let's just kind of say, in terms of applying these political analyses to my own context, because I think for so long I needed to compartmentalize to survive the space, that I was in, because I didn't want to, like I said before, the nail that sticks out gets the hammer. And it's only been like, I'd say in the last few years where I've really become more comfortable saying what needs to be said. And that comes obviously with its own risks and stuff like that, but it's a lot more comforting to know that you have a community of like-minded folks who are struggling with very similar issues. And I think that, the academic piece was one part of my journey about starting to, unpack my perceptions of Thailand and my, my experience of training martial arts as a colonized subject, but also later on when I think some of it really started like, I started connecting more dots, I suppose, when I started participating in a lot of these conversations, initially through that Southpaw Facebook group. And when I was just kind of like hearing other people, other BIPOC folks kind of like going through very similar things, I was like, holy fuck, like, like these things go everywhere. You just know in your bones, like this shit's everywhere. But like hearing a community of other folks kind of struggle with these things and unpack these issues. Like, for example, I remember a while back there was a conversation going on in the Southpaw group about I won't say which fighter, but there's this one female fighter in particular in Thailand who's got a massive following and is like super. I got like the most fights ever, or whatever, for a foreigner. And yeah, there were some problematic issues with the discourse around how they presented themselves. And like I remember, I always had like issue with it. I couldn't quite put my finger on why it was, but then the conversation was happening in Southpaw, and I was like, yes, fuck yeah, that's exactly what I was like. You took the words right out of my mouth, and it was so like it was so just illuminating and just rewarding to kind of see that.
There was a lot of white fragility too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, are you saying something about this person? I mean, it doesn't sound negative, but it doesn't sound positive either. And I don't like that.
Yeah, totally. Like I remember I made the suggestion about like, I don't know, a few years back being like, maybe we should like aspire to having more trauma informed coaching within the martial arts community, because, a lot of kids, especially the kids I was coaching at that point in time, were coming in from justice programs. We're basically the kids that like schools, foster homes were basically like kicking out of their doors. So like basically when you had no other option, like I was basically taking them in and like, coaching them. And like that was a really, really like interesting experience. And it like And at the time, it was just kind of really hammering home to me, like people don't really know how to teach some kids who are confronted or who are coping with issues, especially those who are like facing issues related to complex PTSD, right? Like your pedagogy needs to adapt to how people bring their issues in, because like, you know, no two people who have complex PTSD will manifest their symptoms the same way, right? Some may do, some may not, but like the point I'm trying to say is like we can better attenuate our martial arts programs to people who come from marginalized communities. We just sort of pay better attention. And I really like, because I work in a certain area that like, well, in education really, and like that's fundamentally, you know, like it's a big tone shift in the last 10 years, you know, about how not only administrators but like educators need to be like fundamentally reattuned to just how much child trauma manifests as like behavior problems in class, and like just you know there's all sorts of issues I don't want to get into now, but like, you know, the achievement gap and all that kind of stuff. But the point is when I made like, you know, just like a very soft comment being like, you know, hey, we should do this would probably be good, we better, you know, we capture more people, you know, improve well-being amongst people who probably needed the most. And I've had like similar conversations with, you know, some folks in my gym kind of being like, you know, they get kind of tired only catering to like rich suburban folks, because I mentioned earlier, like my gym used to be very centrally located in the city that I live in. And that was really good because like you could take, it was accessible by bus, it was like by foot, and it was just like just a really great place to go. And it was like kind of in the community. They moved to like one of the most fucking isolated spots in the whole city. It's in an area where like the average income is like something like $750,000.
Oh man.
This goes back to the conversation we had in the neighborhood martial arts project where we talked about martial arts can also be gentrified.
Totally. And that's exactly what happened. You know, there was like, it says a lot about how people look at brown bodies in terms of the potential that martial arts offers them versus it does like your like white kid named Ryder who lives in the suburbs, right? Like I remember this attitude of people saying that like you can't teach these kids that. They're going to go out and they're going to go and like they're going to basically go be violent elsewhere. You're just basically giving them tools to be more violent. And I was just like, A, that just completely betrays everything about martial arts and what I know about it, because that's not how it works. And two, it's fucked up that like the one like lifeline that, you know, was really helpful in my own life. You're saying that these kids can't have it because you see them as like these like violent things or the potential for violent, you know, and like you're just basically giving the tools to do that. And that was actually one of the reasons why, like, you know, I was sort of pressured, let's just say, to shut down the gym. I was kind of like building from the ground up at that time, and yeah, it was super fucked up, man. Yeah.
A lot of the things that we talked about, right, as far as like racialized people absorbing these views when they go to a racialized country, right? Ultimately, this is just a symptom of a bigger colonial process, which is how the perception of the racialized other can be transferred to and internalized by other racialized people. So racialized people can also perpetuate coloniality, white supremacy, colorism. To your point, right? If you are colonized people, it does not mean you are immune to replicating a lot of those processes.
Absolutely. Like it's like, it was like what I was, you know, kind of alluding to earlier, you know, just because, you know, I'm an indigenous man from this territory, and I've had like, you know, this is that point in like the native studies class where I have to kind of like itemize all the traumas I've been through to kind of provide evidence about how hard it is to be native in the prairies kind of thing. But like you have this idea of yourself, you know, and like, you know, as a marginalized person, even though, you know, you don't say that, like, you don't carry that attitude with you everywhere. Like, I'm an oppressed person, but like you nonetheless have history affecting you and only you because of who you are. And I think that sort of implants this false consciousness, if you want to call it that, that somehow that absolves you from participating in colonizing processes elsewhere. And I think to myself about how like there's this there's this indigenous bourgeoisie class of like professionals and consultants that exist in my line of work that really like to visit all exclusive paid trips to Mexico. And I always find it curious when I see these guys who are on one hand like attending these events about land back and promoting indigenous sovereignty and like really sort of like advancing the idea of indigenous liberation, and then go to a fucking other country and participate in the denigration of a whole other people. I just find that like it's fucked up. And like when people like it kind of get called out on it, they think, well, no, like I'm native, like that's not what's happening. It's like, dude, that's literally what's happening. You're thinking that somehow because you're this, you can't participate in it. That almost makes you worse.
It's like what I was talking about earlier, right? This bypassing, right? Or maybe it's not bypassing, right? Maybe to Ron's point, they just straight up lying.
Cognitive dissonance,
Now, the way we think about Muay Thai and training and fighting in Thailand in the English-speaking world is framed by white people or is framed for white audiences. So, Mike, is there any overlap with how native stories are told and who gets to tell your stories? Because that, too, for a long time was told by white people.
Yeah, like that's such a important conversation. I feel like only like honestly in the last 5-6 years you start to see like a critical emphasis on ensuring that indigenous voices and stories are being presented by indigenous people, and to ensure that there's fidelity and integrity to the stories that we're trying to tell and that is represented authentically to whoever you're showing it to. And like that's like I feel like that's so like very recent in a lot of like indigenous spaces nowadays. That wasn't always the case. You always had to go through gatekeepers to get the things that you wanted out there, and often like that resulted in a product or the discourse or an image that like misrepresented, and it often sort of reinforced white ideas around you. And so when I think about Muay Thai and like how it was packaged to me growing up, and I was saying earlier, it was like it was movies and it was MMA, right? And like of course that would be like how the West would come to it, right? Like like with all the issues with MMA attached to it, and certainly how it was like initially incubated in its early days, there's all sorts of issues with it, but it wasn't like I came to martial arts because it was like, like local hockey or something like that. It wasn't just, I had to sort of latch onto it because of largely how the media portrayed it, and largely, to be honest, like how white culture represented it. And like we said earlier, you kind of like, you can compartmentalize your rationale for it. Sometimes it's just like as simple as like, oh, I want to like get tough, I want to like learn these effective quote unquote martial arts. And that can be really challenging. So I guess I sympathize, with this idea that, how, especially like white Muay Thai practitioners / influencers who travel to Thailand and then sell the Instagram story to us over here. I can definitely, I can feel the frustration about what that must mean to Thai people and Muay Thai practitioners out there who don't get that opportunity to represent what Muay Thai is to them to the West, right? Because oftentimes, like pretty much, I don't know, when I go on Instagram, it's mostly like white people. I specifically follow Thai trainers and Thai fighters just to avoid some of that, and you kind of got to navigate the Thai language within the posts. But for the most part, it's really difficult to sort of perceive Muay Thai outside of how white culture has packaged it to the rest of the world. And I suppose that, going to what I was saying earlier, that's sort of like a frustrating double-edged sword when it comes to sort of like, on one hand, you're promoting something that, is really important to a group of people. But on the other hand, it's also serving aims that, actually harm you. And, I think about like early representations of indigenous people in film and art, and it was kind of like, a lot of it was tokenized and a lot of it was, not the way we would have liked to do it, but there's still sort of this like attitude that like, well, it was something, so it's good. It's like, we'll take what we can get kind of thing. And I just think, that can get better as time goes on. And I think that it's going to be very hard for like, especially like non-Thai Muay Thai practitioners to sort of get out of the way. And I think that's sort of like, I remember that kind of being told to us early on in some of the idle more conversations. It's just like, a lot of times you got to decenter yourself, right? Like even me as an Indigenous man, I can take up space that is, like inhospitable. I could take up space in a way that's inhospitable to certain people around me. And it's like, if we don't have that consciousness in terms of how, Muay Thai is represented to the world, and if you don't empower Thai voices to represent it in a way and to have those stories meaningfully can be conveyed to a broader audience, we're just going to continually perpetuate a bunch of shit about Muay Thai that is just going to continually harm the sport, harm the people within it, and further, imperial colonial aims within Thailand. And just, and also you mentioned earlier on, kind of saying that like, martial arts is like heavily favored by law enforcement, as their preferred mode of, self-defense. And so when you have to share spaces with military and cops, it's fucked up. And it's like, but no one really gives you that opportunity to convey that, I suppose.
So when you go on Muay Thai Instagram, you're not seeing a bunch of white people holding pads for Thai people. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But it's almost like from that framework, right? To your point about what they exist for, it's like almost like they exist to hold pads for white people.
Totally. That's the image. Yep.
Now, Ron, do you have thoughts on this as far as like who gets to tell your stories? Because like white people have never told black stories, have they? Like there's no white savior stories, right? Right? They don't do that, right?
Man, actually, as a funny aside, what movie I was thinking about recently? I was thinking about some movies that I grew up watching as a kid, but old enough to remember. Like I was thinking about that movie, The Blind Side, and I'm like, Sandra Bullock, why? Why did you do this? Good Lord, this movie did not age well. This is bad. And apparently the story wasn't even true. That was the worst part. It was not accurate at all. At all. They didn't even get it close. And I'm just like, man, like it's bad, but like for real, man, like that is like, but like to continue the topic with Muay Thai, like that's a big gripe I have. Like, and what's funny is that the only people that I can actually talk to about this, even if we might not agree on everything politically, is like other Black Muay Thai practitioners, because we do understand what it's like to be perceived from a racialized lens, and especially the only people that seem to be like not rocking with or glorifying child fighting in my circle are usually people of color, more specifically the Black Muay Thai fighters I rock with. And a lot of it just comes from like we've seen where that pipeline goes, where you're taking a child's childhood away from them because they got to be the breadwinner, or worse, this constant like whenever there's a racialized other, they're no longer a child. They're automatically an adult, no matter where and when they exist in time. Well, the 7-year-old kid is fighting for their family. A child shouldn't be fighting for their family in any context.
And Gerald Horn has talked about this, right? Because it hits different because he wrote a book about Black boxing and how in the past they had Black, even children, fighting each other for the entertainment of white people, right?
Exactly.
And so we have a history of that, not just with Black people, but it's like that has been a history of colonialism. And so even if Thai people are the ones orchestrating it, the fact that it's white eyes there watching this and paying for this and ogling at this and like even romanticizing this, then that changes things. If it was just like Thai people doing something and only Thai people watch it, that's one thing. But the white people there, their gaze changes the whole thing. The Western gaze changes what it observes. That's the power of imperialism. And also the conditions of how this all happened, right? It's not like it's happening in a fishbowl where Thailand is in a bubble from the rest of the planet, right? It's all in one giant fishbowl that's been impacted by Western colonialism and Western hegemony. So it's not like nothing was affected by the West, right? And this isn't the episode to talk about it, but it's like, if you look into the history of Thailand, just from like World War II, their alliance with Japan, and after, where they allied with the US, the West, or the deals that they signed with Great Britain, right? But the post-colonial period, Thailand became a hub for the US and the CIA to control communism in that whole region, right?
Yeah, like, I sometimes think about this and like how sometimes like well, let's just say, for example, like a context that's familiar to me, like how like indigenous folks can end up defending the very system that's harming our own communities because they benefit from it, right? Like, and I sometimes think about how in Thailand, like I remember a good friend of mine, Thai guy, actually, he was raised in America. He was adopted very early on, but then he moved back to Thailand, largely because he was just fed up with the States. But like yeah. So, anyways, he was a fighter, and like we became really good friends. And he kind of like tells me a lot about sort of things that I guess I probably wouldn't be able to know as a foreigner. I remember him taking me around to like different areas of Bangkok, and like I remember we took to this one place where it was just like one of the highest crime rates in the area, but he kept saying it's like, the West tends to look at it as like this really dangerous, licentious sort of like area of Bangkok. And there's a lot of crime there, but I mean, like, that's what poverty breeds, right? It's just, he showed me this like area there where it was like this little oasis, right? It was this little boxing ring and some just ratty pads and some boxing gloves kind of sitting there. And it was like a place where like even the gangsters wouldn't go to. It was like this kind of like haven, right? And I remember there was like an issue that happened a while back where they were closing a lot of the street stalls in and around Bangkok with the new government that came in, I guess, a while back. They like really hammered down on food stalls, and so like there was these really like classic areas of Bangkok where you could go just get like world class cuisine from like a $2 plate of food like sitting on a sidewalk, right? And it was just like it's one of the I really love that aspect of Bangkok. But then they like pushed all these like vendors out, right? In lieu of having actual storefronts. And so it displaced a lot of like poor people who were really like utilizing, these food stalls to make a means. But anyways, I remember like the rhetoric coming from Thai people from certain Thai folks at the time, right? Like there was kind of like this, and it kind of made it almost like it was almost eerie in terms of its similarity to how people sort of justify the unjustifiable back here, because they'll say things, well, it's like it's for the sake of progress, it's like it basically boils down to that. This is how we progress. And it's like, and within that, it's almost like there's this coded message that like we need to be like the West, in other words. And that's sort of like, it's fucked up because it's kind of like it just collapses like Thai people and all of like their complexity and their experiences into like you kind of alluded to it earlier, Sam, like the Western gaze and like what that needs to be, and then it's co-opted and internalized by like the Thai elite, and like unfortunately that can sort of like creates, because like you mentioned earlier, and I think, Ron, we didn't really talk about it this episode, but I don't think maybe not time for it, but gambling is such a huge issue, and like gambling kind of like dominates the stadiums, and like it shapes matches. It's like shapes almost every aspect of the sport, and not for the better. And that system has been sort of protected by like a core Thai elite, and it's like because they benefit from it, and it's like there's no interest to change because a certain core group of people can benefit from continued exploitation and domination, and that's just like the unfortunate sort of dynamic, anyways, that I've kind of noticed over the years.
To piggyback on that, to talk about the way that you want to present Thailand that's palatable for the West. Think about a couple of years ago, Thailand had one of the biggest pro-democracy movements of the time, right? I think only like India prior to that, right, had more people, but like Thailand had so many people on the streets demanding democracy for so long. And you know where you never saw that? You never saw that on any of the Thai Instagram, people over there. They weren't talking about that at all, right? So they're like, oh, I talk to real Thai people, but you're not talking to those people who were protesting, right? The same thing with like people who were all about India when it comes to yoga and stuff, right? When it's like a huge percentage of the planet at one point was protesting, right? You never saw that from the yoga community in the West. They speak for Indian people, but they never talk to these people, right? The ones who are demanding democracy and worker rights, right? And the same thing with Thailand, right? So to your point, right, to collapse Thai people into one experience, like, yeah, you could also still talk to Thai people and have them confirm your biases, right? But why aren't you also talking to these people who are talking about pro-democracy? I know several people in Thailand, right, who disagree with some of these posts from these influencers or even like some of these lefties who love Thailand or whatever. But it's like, I guess it kind of creates this echo chamber where they don't hear their voices because they're afraid to post online or disagree with them online because of their surveillance of their reactionary government. They also don't want to get attacked and harassed by reactionaries and Westerners. So it's like, yeah, then you can set it up in a way that confirms your bias or see it however you want. But that doesn't mean that that's like the only view. And that doesn't mean that that isn't a reactionary view. Whether it's in Thailand or the US, if the only people you know is from your gym, you're getting the cult view. Also, think about the essentialism of thinking you know a people by hanging out at their gym. It's like a white dude going to Korea to train Taekwondo and thinking now I know all there is to being Korean. You're flattening and essentializing, but also you have no context for what's normal. What's normal in gym culture is not necessarily what's normal. We talked about this in our episode about trauma-informed coaching, how only knowing people in your gym warps your perception. You're an unreliable narrator. Worse sometimes than people who have no experience in the gym because you'll be overconfident and they won't. Do you even follow anything on social media about Thailand outside of training life? Then how much do you even care about learning about Thailand? So where does this confidence in Thai knowledge come from? You told me this off the air, Mike, about how much this bothered you, but you raised the point that if you're seeing child fighters being bought and you don't bat an eye about it, then maybe buying children for sexual services hits different or perhaps doesn't hit at all. Like we've talked about this before, but so much weird shit and weird beliefs permeate the gyms because if gym people are all they know, they'll have no outside voice telling them how weird they are and no outside or third party barometer to measure against. Often martial arts people don't even know about other sports culture as a reference. They have no bar. It's like thinking you know all there is to know about the world because you've learned about the world through your gym. It's Dunning-Kruger. It's that Henzo Gracie bullshit. How can you do an ethnographic study of a thing without knowing how to place it in a bigger context? Imagine someone coming to the US only for SoulCycle and now thinking they know everything about the US and the lives of the people here. How can you even talk about SoulCycle without knowing the context of the culture it exists in or how it came to be? Especially when you're here in the US for your own personal improvement and just to do SoulCycle. So you're not even invested in learning about the rest of the US, nor do you have any incentive to because your goal was SoulCycle, not US history and culture. Like if you really wanted to know about it, the gym might be the last place to go to study a country. Also, when you're there for a specific reason, you have no time to learn anything else, nor meet anyone else because you're only there for that specific purpose. Like the example of SoulCycle, if you're only there to cycle. But because you're here and because you meet people at your gym, you can convince yourself now you know everything there is to know. It's like I hate people who go to a country through the US military and think they now know everything there is to know about a country. You don't even know the US. How are you going to know about another country? It's like what Ron said. You don't even know American sports or America. How are you going to know everything about Thailand and their national sport? And we talked about this for Taekwondo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but martial arts can also be an institutional tool for muscular nationalist politics. Muay Thai is no exception. It's even built a pilgrimage aspect where you immerse yourself and with state permission, allowed to be provisionally Thai. Imagine going anywhere else. Imagine going to the prairie and doing what Westerners do in Thailand as far as dress, tattoos, spiritual practices, name changes, and so on. But Thailand is different because they were given permission and everyone somehow knows this so people don't make fun of it. So it's a unique state and political project, and we can't forget about that either. There's a similar project with Thai restaurants. That's called gastro diplomacy. You can look that up also. Then there's One Championship's use and promotion of Muay Thai and Muay Thai's move to be included in the Olympics. So it's a much bigger project. It reminds me of Korea and Taekwondo and K-pop, or India with yoga, or even Jiu-Jitsu with Brazil. There's also great political books about how soccer has been used as a political tool. Actually, there's extensive academic work on sports, all of which also applies to martial arts. It's just that many practitioners aren't aware of this work, which is to say, you really need to step out of the gym to even understand the gym.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the whole time I was traveling to Thailand, it's like that whole time, like I guess since like the original coup, which was around like what, like 2006 or something like that, which deposed their then prime minister, was like, I don't know, it was I suppose like I should have seen it more. I should have like known more about it, but it was like the forces that govern and sort of animate tourism in Thailand sort of like inoculated you from it a little bit. Because I remember asking like questions about being like, what's that going on? Like, why are these people wearing red shirts? And it was like, I remember like tuk-tuk drivers and other folks would just be like you could almost like two things. You could almost hear like see the fear of wanting to like people even just expressing an opinion in that kind of context, which is totally understandable. But on the other hand, you saw it as sort of like, depending on who you asked, it was like, I remember this one gentleman, and he was sort of like, I guess what you want to call it, like I don't want to say his name or even his title because it would be pretty easy to identify who he is, but like he was, I'll just say like definitely in the upper echelon of Thai class, and he kind of. I remember one point, it was very telling. You know, we were sitting in at this gym in about 2011, and he kind of like was shitting on the red shirts, and it kind of like, you know, that when you're of a certain class and like that's what your position is towards it, like it kind of like started to tell me a little bit more about what I needed to know. And then certainly as I started learning more about it since then, like I start to see what the red shirt movement is and why so many people within Thailand, you know, or not so many people, but why certain people and the spaces that Western people particularly were familiar with were like shielding people from even coming to understand what it is, right? Because I mean, like to do that would create some immediate challenges because it confronts the notion of Thailand as this peaceful place, whatever, right? Because you know, if we see it as like a country immersed in like intense civil conflict, it can feel a little bit like wrong, I guess, to want to visit a place like that, right? But it's like it's funny how people have this like amnesia when it comes to the red shirt movement over the last like 15 years or 17 years or whatever. It's just like it just never happened. And I asked people who literally been to Thailand like multiple times since in like the last 10 years, and they like asking about the red shirt movement. They even have no fucking clue what you're talking about.
There is no war in Ba Sing Se.
If you're a white foreigner in Thailand, right, and you have like this outsized voice, then you should actually question yourself. Wait, why do I, as a white foreigner, have such an outsized voice here? Do I have an outsized voice because I have privilege? Do I have an outsized voice not because it's the most deserving of being elevated, but instead it's the voice they want elevated? The voice that helps push a reactionary political narrative? Like the US loves to elevate voices of happy immigrants, of happy tourists, over Black Lives Matter. And likewise, white foreigners get uplifted over pro-democracy movements, over red shirts, over labor movements. They'll have you believing everyone loves monarchy and the military government. But for a lot of Westerners, since they benefit, they don't know or care why they went to Thailand and became a big shot, as if it's all meritocracy and free markets. It's all deserved. So that's why they talk so much. But that's not the same for every Thai person, especially for activists, protesters, student movements, and young people. You should actually be suspicious of yourself. If you go to like Korea, I'll use my country as an example, and it's like you as a white person get to have this outsized voice, you should really question why that's happening. You know, you're like, wait, is it because my voice is so good, or is it that other people are not allowed to talk? You're not that cool, right? It's like you have to question yourself. Like, how is this happening, right? You have to stay vigilant, not just of like what's happening around you, but also of yourself and your own narrative and also of your own rationalizations, right? Like if I'm taking up space in like an indigenous movement or like talking about racism against Black people, right? And I'm taking up space there and then my voice is really loud. Is it because like people who look like you are getting killed for saying shit? And it's like, I'm not, so I have no fear of speaking. Is that what's going on, right? And that is part of that Americanism. You know, I could go wherever and say whatever I want because my freedom of speech follows me everywhere I go. It's like whiteness is a superpower and white power follows you everywhere you go. But Ron, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this final thoughts, at the end of the day, exploitation is exploitation, man, you know? And I sometimes, to like kind of go full circle and connect the dots to a few things. I sometimes worry about the direction that Muay Thai is taking because You've actually brought this up in the liberation martial arts curriculum. Again, I highly recommend anybody listening to this. The best $15 a month you're ever gonna spend, seriously. But it's kind of for those who are like already subscribed to that, and kind of like this kind of relates to a lot of the conversations that are happening there, because I've been personally doing my own self study and engaging in like, just looking at what Muay Thai look like. Not necessarily like I'm looking specifically at like Golden Era Muay Thai as this is known, but I'm just trying to really like I'm really doing my best in my own free time to just know what Muay Thai look like without white people, to be blunt, just to see like how different it looks. And it's hard. Like boxing, there's a lot of like all-time great boxers that there's really not a whole lot of footage of them out there, even though boxing is a way more popular sport than Muay Thai. So it's even worse with Muay Thai because there's not a whole lot of footage of even the all-time greats in their actual primes. It's usually after that. The footage isn't that great anyway. But what I noticed in the golden era, and this is me, I'm making this up on the fly, just my own analysis. I am not an academic. That's not my job. This is me. I'm a practitioner of Muay Thai, a black man in America, and I'm just trying to piece it together and figure out like what we might have missed because of Western influence in Muay Thai. And the one consistent thing was just like, it seemed like without the influence of like gamblers dictating the money that these fighters, workers have to make, is that there was a lot more freedom and creative expression within their styles. It wasn't just like technicians, brawlers, clinchers, and then kickers. And then you got that. You had that, but you had even styles within those styles. Like you had technical guys who mostly use boxing, even though, you know, if a Westerner tells it, oh, the Thais don't box, like, oh yes, they don't box. The people who rack up hundreds of fights, they definitely don't know how to box, right? Whatever. But like, you know, you can see like it looked fun out there for them. And which is funny because even the people who like hype up the golden era, they're like, oh, they were just grittier, they were just tougher. Again, like glorifying like grit and like poverty and all that shit, like Westerners tend to do. But like that's not what I got out of it. The same feeling that I had like watching Anderson Silva coming up in his prime was the same feeling that I got watching like the best fighters in the golden era fight. It's like it's beautiful fighting. Even the fighters who went on major winning streaks all the time, it's good fighting. And so when you have not only Western influences affecting your sport, but you also have the influence of gambling affecting your sport, there's gonna have to come to a point in the Muay Thai community where like there has to be a real critique of these two things that can't just be subbed up to just being quote unquote Thai culture. Oh, it's just in the culture. It's just in the culture. Because when I hear that,
or tradition.
I hear the exact same thing. Oh, it starts in the family. You know how those black people are. It's just in the family. It's just in their culture. They're just violent people. They listen to their rap. They listen to their violence. It's just in their culture. It's the same fucking shit, whether people want to acknowledge that or not. And I will never, especially nowadays, whenever I hear that, I can't entertain it, and I just really don't want to even deal with that because it's not an analysis and it's bioessentialism and it's just racist bullshit through and through. So I don't want like the Thai people are people at the end of the day. Thailand isn't some fixed point in time in history. They are people that evolve and are affected by their material conditions just as we are. And if the only analysis that we have from them regarding Muay Thai is from white Westerners who don't even want to have a real discussion about the material conditions outside of glorifying poverty and glorifying the fact that these people are struggling, then that's not a real analysis. That's just Western chauvinism.
So now I know why they call that period the golden era. It was because it was before white people.
I mean, nobody wants to say it out loud. That's the way I perceived it. I'm like, so before like all the white, and even like the best fighters, the best foreigners, like the best foreigner wasn't even white. It was a Cameroon. And Danny Bill is the best foreigner ever. And yet white people don't even want to acknowledge that. They're like, no, 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 Ramon Deckers. I'm like, oh, okay, man. Like anything from Europe and America is the shit. Even though Danny Bill is from Europe too, but that's different. He's African, so that's not the same.
Foreigner means European. A black fighter, especially one from Africa, well, that's an illegal immigrant, right?
Yeah, like it's so ridiculous, and it's like, and even the foreigners who were coming up, even the white ones at that time, are just better fighters than the ones that are out now, who are really good, but it's just not the same level because, again, Danny Bill has some flair to his style. A lot of people call it like, oh, he beat the Thais using the Thai style, and it's like, so he was creative and he had a style of his own and he used his brain. That's the Thai style. What is it's like Mexican boxing? What is Mexican?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like, which Mexican boxer are we talking about? They don't like what? Like, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? American boxing from where? Philly, Bees. I don't know what that like. Who? What?
They're collapsing culture into a flat, fixed, one-dimensional thing, and by doing so, it's easier to grasp. It's like people who collapse blackness into hip hop and quote unquote the hood, because then it's simple. It's something you can consume and participate in. So now you know all there is to know about blackness. But going back to the Western gaze and the observer influencing the observed, Westerners are not an empty box that can go somewhere and just take in without leaving anything behind. You are influencing a place just as it is influencing you. Except in the case of whiteness, white influences more than it is influenced. It's asymmetrical. Some call this privilege, some call this white supremacy. Even coming from Western gyms that are already toxic, you're going to bring that baggage with you, and it will color your lens, like colonial ideas like survival of the fittest and steel sharpens steel. And that'll frame your view, and then you'll project that onto everything else as your analysis. And then maybe you'll see childhood as an extension of steel sharpens steel, and see children as steel to be sharpened rather than as children, which goes back to views of not only child fighting in Thailand, but you can have minors fighting professional MMA and kids doing tackle football. It's the idea that children are just small adults. There's such a disproportionate amount of people in martial arts who are obsessed with the Save the Children QAnon movement, while simultaneously believing children to be small adults, and who will still partake in sexual imperialism, and who will die on a hill that a teenage girl was asking for it, or that a teenage boy wants to be sexually assaulted by an older woman. So all of this goes back to children and consent, which goes back to sexual imperialism. There's been people who admit on Twitter to looking for and going to countries where they have a low age of consent and think nothing they do there is wrong because it happens to be legal there. That's imperialism. And imperialism will shape your view because it's the water you see the world through. It's the water you're so used to, you don't know you're in water, and you don't know you're always looking through water. And since you can't see it, since you don't notice it, you will defend it as if it's your very reality. It's your very identity. It's the very world you know. Also, this is still very illegal for Westerners because your domestic consent laws follow you. And it's especially illegal to try and go somewhere with the intent to commit sexual acts on minors. So we can't even be like, oh, we have to accept this because it's legal and it's their rules. But I guess this no longer applies when you become a sexpat, which is more incentive for someone to sexpatriate. The age of consent was a problem in Korea, which goes back to Japanese occupation when they lowered the age of consent to 13. Then the US, who maintained comfort women stations and sexual imperialism, kept that law intact. It wasn't changed till much later. And really, even US mainstream outlets now admit Korea has only had quote unquote democracy for a very short time. And prior to that, it has been under US backed dictatorships. And even with that said, Korea still doesn't have democracy. US still has control over Korea. So this is a pattern. And Asia knows all about this. Even Western attraction to Asian women because they perceive them as childlike. Imperialism is paternalism, which means child property. Don't be surprised when macho dudes going to a country to prove how manly they are also partake in sexual imperialism. This isn't just in Thailand. You also hear about this in Filipino and Indonesian martial arts. It's just that Muay Thai just happens to be more popular in the West. And it's more of a thing in Western Muay Thai than other martial arts to go there and train and fight a native person. But is that innocent? Is that manufactured? Who does that attract? What baggage comes along with that? How will that frame your experience? Even if you're not a macho white dude, how does this framework affect your experience, affect your views? This whole conversation, right, was about how even non-white people can adopt and be influenced by the dominant view. So this whole episode hopefully is one that stirs self-reflection and hard discussions, and discussions that don't end in one discussion, but discussions that continue and people talk about and think about for a long time. But with that said, this episode has gone for a very long time, and due to some technical difficulties, we lost Mike, but he's been more than generous with his time, so he doesn't even need to come back. So thank you, Mike. And thank you, Ron, for being on the show. This was a really important conversation to have.
This is a great conversation, and thank you for inviting me again, Sam. It's nice to be back on the show again.
If you like this episode and like what we do, support us on Patreon. We also have the Liberation Martial Arts program. If you want to train with us from wherever you are, you'll find lots of techniques, exercises, theory, pedagogy, and even political theory. We also have Fighters Brew, which is a manga-inspired martial arts audio series, as well as Fighters Brew transcripts that include martial arts tutorials. You can find Liberation Martial Arts online, along with Fighters Brew on Patreon. You can find Southpaw merch at our store. You can find all pertinent links on the show notes. With all that said, thanks for listening.